A billionaire walks into a small-town garage with a dead car and a desperate secret. A mechanic who lost everything, his career, his name, his future, says yes when every smart instinct tells him to say no. Hidden inside the dashboard of a 1967 Mustang that hasn't run in 40 years, a letter. And inside that letter, a confession that will shatter 2 lives and bring down an empire. If you've ever been wronged and nobody believed you, this story is for you. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The morning everything changed started the way most mornings in Millbrook did. Badly. Ethan Mercer was lying on his back underneath a 2009 Silverado that smelled like burnt transmission fluid and poor decisions, his knuckles already split from where he'd caught them on a rusted bracket when he heard tires on gravel. Not the slow, cautious crunch of someone who'd driven down Millfield Road before. This was the sound of someone who had never in their life worried about what kind of road they were on. He slid out from under the truck. The car that had pulled into his lot was a black Mercedes S-Class, spotless, tinted, the kind of vehicle that made the potholes on Route 7 seem personally embarrassed. It sat there idling for a moment longer than necessary, like whoever was inside needed a second to psych themselves up. Ethan stood, pulled a rag from his back pocket, and started cleaning his hands. He already knew this wasn't going to be a routine oil change. The driver's door opened first. A man in a dark suit stepped out, mid-40s, built like he spent his lunch breaks lifting things that didn't need lifting. He scanned the lot with the expression of someone performing a security sweep, which was almost funny because the most dangerous thing in Ethan's lot was a pit bull mix named Socket who was currently asleep on a pile of floor mats. Then the rear door opened and she got out. Ethan's first impression of Victoria Ashford was that she looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days but would never admit it. She was maybe 30, maybe a year or 2 older. It was hard to tell because the exhaustion on her face was fighting with something else underneath it. Some kind of iron stubbornness that kept her posture straight and her expression controlled. She wore a gray blazer over a black turtleneck, and her dark hair was pulled back in a way that looked intentional but probably wasn't. There was a smudge of something on the sleeve of her blazer, ink maybe, or coffee, and she either hadn't noticed it or didn't care. She walked toward him like she owned the property, but not in an arrogant way. More like she was someone who'd forgotten how to walk any other way. "Ethan Mercer?" she said. "Last time I checked." She stopped a few feet away and looked at him, really looked at him, the way people do when they're deciding whether to trust you. Not just whether you're competent, whether you're the kind of person who will actually do what you say you'll do. "My name is Victoria Ashford. I'm the CEO of Ashford Industries." She paused, as if waiting for a reaction. He gave her one. He kept wiping his hands. "Okay." A flicker of something crossed her face. Surprise, maybe. She was probably used to her name landing differently. "I was told you're the best classic restoration mechanic in this part of the state," she said. "Possibly in several states?" "Whoever told you that was being generous." "Tom Briggs told me. He said you rebuilt his '69 Camaro from nothing, a shell with no engine, no interior, nothing but a frame, and made it run better than the day it left the factory." "Tom Briggs also told me his ex-wife's cooking gave him mono," Ethan said. "He's not always reliable." That surprised a half smile out of her. It looked like it cost her something, that smile, like she'd been rationing them. "Can we talk inside?" she asked. Ethan's office was not designed to impress. It had a metal desk he'd bought at a church sale, an ancient Mr. Coffee machine that produced something brown and hot that he called coffee, a corkboard covered in service orders and post-it notes, and a framed crayon drawing of a car that his daughter Lily had made when she was 4. Lily was 7 now, but the drawing stayed. Victoria Ashford sat in the plastic chair across from his desk and did not look at her surroundings the way he'd expected her to. No subtle wince at the cracked window, no glance at the oil-stained floor. She set her hands flat on her knees and looked directly at him. "I need you to restore a car," she said. "A 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback. Year, make, model. Easy enough. What's the condition?" "It's been sitting in a climate-controlled storage facility outside of Hartford for 40 years. Before that, my father owned it. He drove it everywhere. It was his personal car, his first major purchase after he started the company. And then one day he just stopped, parked it, Never touched it again. Ethan set his coffee mug down. 40 years. 40 years. And nobody's worked on it in that time? She hesitated, just barely. 3 specialists have attempted it, over the last 4 years since my father passed. None of them could finish it. Ethan looked at her. Couldn't finish it or wouldn't? The first one said the engine block was too degraded. The second said the same. The third, she stopped. He returned the advance payment without explanation and refused to discuss the project. That was strange enough to file away. A mechanic returning money and refusing to talk about why was not normal. People in this business didn't walk away from money easily, and they definitely didn't do it quietly. What do you know about why it was parked? Ethan asked. Nothing. My father never talked about it, and he's not here to ask. She said it flatly, but something underneath the flatness had edges. I'm sorry about your father, Ethan said, and meant it. Thank you. She said it like she'd said it thousands of times, and it had stopped meaning much. The car was important to him. I want it running. There's a memorial gala in 8 weeks. It would have been his 75th birthday. And I want to present it there. 8 weeks is tight for a car that's been sitting 40 years. I know. I'll pay for it. What's your budget? She named a figure that made Ethan go very still for a second. That's... He stopped. Is that enough? It was more than his shop made in 18 months. It's enough, he said carefully. But I have to be honest with you, Ms. Ashford. I can't promise 8 weeks. Not without seeing the car. And if the engine's as far gone as your first 2 specialists said, they were wrong, she said. Simply, without anger, just certainty. How do you know? Because my father never did anything carelessly. If he stored that car for 40 years, he stored it properly. Whatever's wrong with it isn't mechanical neglect. She looked at him steadily. I think the specialists got scared of the work and made excuses. I don't want someone who's going to get scared. Ethan thought about that. He thought about the fact that he had a daughter to pick up from school in 4 hours, a mortgage on this shop that was 12 days behind, and a reputation built on taking jobs nobody else wanted. He thought about the third mechanic, who'd given the money back and wouldn't say why. He probably should have asked more questions. I'll need to see the car first, he said. No commitment until I see what I'm working with. Of course. She reached into the bag she'd set on the floor and produced a manila folder. The storage facility address, the access codes, and a complete photo archive my father had made in 1999, the last time he had it professionally photographed. Ethan opened the folder. The top photograph stopped him. It was a stunning car, fastback body, original Highland green paint that had faded to something almost olive, chrome trim still showing its bones beneath the age. Even in a photograph taken 27 years ago, it looked like it was thinking about going somewhere fast. There was something in the lines of it that felt almost like personality. When can you go? Victoria asked. Tomorrow morning, he said. I'll have to arrange coverage for the shop. She nodded and stood, and he stood too, and they shook hands across the desk the way people do when they're entering into something they don't entirely understand yet. Mr. Mercer, she said, and paused. Why did you say yes? He looked at the photograph again. Because that car deserves to run, he said, and because your third mechanic gave money back, and that bothers me. She studied him for a moment. It bothers me too, she said. It's bothered me for 2 years. Then she walked out, and the Mercedes pulled away, and Socket the pit bull wandered in from the shop floor and sat on Ethan's feet, which he sometimes did when he sensed that something had changed. Ethan stood there looking at the photograph for a long time. He made 2 calls that afternoon. The first was to Ray Dunham, his only full-time employee, to tell him he'd need to hold down the shop for potentially 8 weeks with some contract help. Ray's response was, Is this about that Mercedes that was parked out front? Yeah. Good money? Very good money. I'll manage. Who's picking up Lily this week? That was Ray. 30 years in the trade, permanently oil-stained, could diagnose an engine by sound alone, and remembered the pickup schedule for his boss's kid without being asked. Ethan had inherited Ray along with the shop when he bought it 7 years ago, and he sometimes thought Ray was the only reason the whole thing hadn't collapsed. I'll figure out Lily, Ethan said. I'm not going anywhere until tomorrow. The second call he made, and this one took him 3 attempts to actually complete because he kept hanging up before it connected, was to his sister Dana. "You need me to take Lily," Dana said before he could even explain. "Just for a few days, maybe more, depending on Ethan. She loves staying with us. You know that. What's the job?" "Restoration job? Could be complex." "How complex?" 40-year-old Mustang that 3 other mechanics walked away from. Dana was quiet for a moment. "And you said yes because I think they gave up too fast." "Or," Dana said, "because you have absolutely no survival instinct." "That too." He could hear her smiling through the phone. Dana had her own opinions about how Ethan ran his life, most of them accurate, none of them welcome. "I'll come get her Friday. You talk to her first, though. She worries." "She's 7. "She's your daughter," Dana said. "She's been worrying since she was 3. Ethan picked up Lily from school at 3:15. She came out in a rush like she always did, backpack bouncing, ponytail half fallen out, talking before she'd even reached him. "And Tyler said the moon is made of cheese, but I told him that was wrong. That's a joke, not a fact. And Mrs. Keary said I was right, but she said I didn't have to say obviously when I said it." "She's not wrong," Ethan said. I know. Lily grabbed his hand and they started walking. She was 7 years old and she had her mother's eyes. Dark brown, direct, the kind that noticed everything. And his stubbornness, which he was told was obvious. She lived at a volume slightly above comfortable for most adults, and she had strong opinions about everything from the correct way to fold paper airplanes to which varieties of cereal were morally acceptable. He loved her in the way that makes you slightly terrified all the time. "Dad," she said, switching gears the way kids do with no warning, "you have that face." "What face?" "The one where something happened, and you're figuring out whether to tell me." He looked down at her. "I'm taking a job. A big one. You're going to stay with Aunt Dana for a while." Lily considered this. "How long is a while?" "Maybe a few weeks." "Is it a cool car?" "Very cool car." "What kind?" 1967 Mustang Fastback. She made a sound that was either impressed or skeptical. With Lily, it was sometimes impossible to tell. "Is it broken bad?" "Hasn't run in 40 years. She was quiet for a half block. Then, "You can fix it." "I don't know yet." "You can fix it," she said again, with the absolute certainty of someone who had not yet learned that some things stay broken. "You always fix things." Ethan squeezed her hand and didn't say what he was thinking, which was that he really, really hoped she was right. The storage facility was 40 minutes outside of Hartford, a low, unmarked building in an industrial park surrounded by the kind of chain link that suggested the contents were valuable. The manager, a careful man named Ellis, who wore his keys on a heavy ring and spoke in short sentences, led Ethan through 2 security doors and down a long corridor that smelled faintly of treated air and sealed time. Unit 7 had a keypad and a heavy lock. Ellis let Ethan work the code himself, which he appreciated. The door rolled up, and the lights came on automatically, and Ethan stood there for a moment, not moving. The Mustang sat in the center of the space like something that had been waiting. A car cover, dusty now, but originally heavy-duty, had been laid over it, but whoever put it there had done it right. A proper car cover, not something improvised, laid out with care. Even through the cover, the shape of the car was unmistakable. That specific fastback roofline, the long hood, the way the proportions managed to look both muscular and elegant at the same time. Ethan pulled the cover off slowly, rolling it back toward the rear. He'd looked at photographs. He thought he was prepared. He wasn't entirely prepared. The paint had gone from Highland green to something more complex. It had taken on the depth that only truly old paint develops, a layering of time over color that you can't replicate with any product on the market. There was surface oxidation, some crazing in the clear coat, a hairline crack along the driver's door that told its own small story. The chrome was clouded, the glass hazy with 40 years of still air. The interior was covered with a separate, smaller cover. It was damaged. It was incomplete. It was the most beautiful car he'd seen in a decade. He walked around it twice without touching it, just looking. Then he crouched by the driver's side rear quarter panel and examined the metal beneath the paint. He ran his fingers along the rocker panel. He looked at the seams. He opened the hood. The engine compartment told the story of a car that had been maintained and then stopped. Not abandoned carelessly, but parked deliberately. There was no catastrophic corrosion. The block was original. The numbers would need to be verified, but the configuration was correct for a 67 fastback. The carburetor was intact but dry, seals gone. The wiring had deteriorated significantly. The specialists weren't wrong that it needed serious work. They were wrong that it was hopeless. Ethan stood there with his hands on the top of the engine compartment and thought about what it would take. He made a mental list that went on for a while. He thought about the budget Victoria had named, which suddenly felt less excessive than it had in his office. He thought about 8 weeks, which suddenly felt genuinely tight. Then he opened the driver's door. It resisted, hinges stiff with disuse, but it opened, and sat in the driver's seat. He put his hands on the steering wheel. The leather had cracked and dried. The dash was faded, but the instrument cluster was intact. Original gauges, the ammeter and fuel gauge and temp gauge sitting idle at 0 like they'd just been waiting for someone to turn the key. The radio was an original AM unit. The seat had good bones under the damage. The headliner was cracked, but structurally present. He sat there for a long time in the silence of the storage unit, alone with a car that hadn't been touched in 4 decades, and he tried to figure out why 3 experienced specialists had walked away. The engine wasn't that bad. Really looking at it, it wasn't that bad. The wiring was a significant project, but it was doable. The bodywork would be careful and painstaking, but nothing structurally catastrophic had happened. There was no reason for this car to defeat 3 specialists. He popped the glove compartment open, just to see, just to be thorough. It was empty except for a dry-rotted rubber seal that fell apart when he touched it, and a faded paper that turned out to be a 1983 registration document James Ashford listed as owner. He almost missed it. He almost closed the glove compartment without looking further, but something made him push his hand deeper into the upper corner. Mechanics develop a habit of checking inside spaces, because engines are full of things people leave behind. And his fingers touched something that shouldn't have been there. He brought out a paperclip. That wasn't it. He reached back in, further this time. What he found was a folded piece of paper, tucked into a narrow gap in the glove compartment's upper housing, shoved deliberately into a space not designed for it. The paper was old, brittle at the edges, slightly yellowed. It had been folded small, the way someone folds something they want to stay hidden. He held it for a moment without opening it. On the outside, in handwriting that had dried and faded to a pale brown, a single letter. V. Just the initial, nothing else. He set it on the passenger seat and looked at it for a long time. Then he took out his phone and called Victoria Ashford. She answered on the second ring. "How bad is it?" she said before he could speak. "Not as bad as your specialist said," he told her. "I'm going to take the job. I can do this in 8 weeks, but I need to start moving immediately." He paused. "I also found something." Silence. "Found what?" "A folded paper in the glove compartment. Hidden in the housing, not just sitting in the compartment, actually tucked into the structure. Old paper, handwriting on the outside." Another pause. "It says V." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Don't open it," she said quietly. "I wasn't going to." "I'll be there in 2 hours." She drove herself this time. No driver, no suit. She arrived in jeans and a dark wool coat, her hair loose, and when Ethan held out the folded paper, she took it with both hands and held it the way you hold something you're not entirely sure you want. They were standing in the storage unit. The Mustang sat between them, the hood still open from Ethan's inspection. "It's his handwriting," she said. She knew without opening it. "My father's." "Take your time," Ethan said. He started to step away to give her privacy. "No." She said it quickly. "Stay." A beat. "Please." He wasn't sure why she asked that. He stayed. She unfolded the paper. She read it. He watched her face. He saw her jaw tighten. He saw her eyes go still in a specific way. The way eyes go still when you're reading something that requires all available processing. He saw her reach out one hand and put it on the roof of the Mustang without seeming to realize she'd done it. She read it twice. Then she folded it again, very carefully, and put it in her coat pocket. Can you really restore this car? She asked. Her voice was the same, controlled, professional, but something underneath it was different now. Yes, he said. And you'll do it, even if it gets complicated. He looked at the car. He looked at her. Ms. Ashford, every restoration gets complicated. Yes, I'll do it. She nodded once. She looked at the Mustang for a long time, her hand still resting on the roof. Then she turned and looked at Ethan directly. My father knew something about you, she said, about your past. He went very still. That's what the letter says. He knew something, and he didn't do what he should have done. And it's been sitting in that car for, I don't know how long he put this here. Years, maybe longer. She was choosing her words carefully. He could tell. I'm not going to tell you what the letter says, not yet, because I don't know if what he wrote is accurate, and I'm not going to say it to you and have it be wrong. She held his gaze. But I'm going to find out, and while you restore this car, I'm going to look into some things. Ethan's heart was doing something strange. He knew she wasn't being deliberately opaque. She was being careful, and in his experience, people were careful with information when the information was dangerous. Okay, he said, because he didn't have another answer, and because his hands had started to shake slightly, which hadn't happened in a long time, and he needed to appear like a man who had his composure under control. Okay, she echoed. She walked toward the door of the unit, then stopped. Ethan? First name suddenly. How long has your shop been in Millbrook? 7 years. Before that? He looked at her. The light in the storage unit was fluorescent and unforgiving, and neither of them looked particularly good in it, and somehow that made the question easier to answer. I was an engineer, he said, mechanical engineer, research and development for a manufacturing company in Boston. Until I wasn't. She nodded slowly. Until you weren't, she repeated. She left without saying anything else. Ethan stood in the storage unit with the 1967 Mustang for another 30 minutes, not doing anything, just thinking about what it meant that a dead man had known his name and written it down and locked it inside a car that had sat untouched for 40 years. He moved the Mustang to his shop the next morning, used his own car trailer, made 4 trips to confirm the storage facility locks, and did the transport himself before dawn, partially because he didn't want the Mustang sitting in highway traffic in daylight with the trailer, and partially because he needed the drive time to think. His shop on Millfield Road was not large, but it was organized the way surgeries are organized. Every tool in its specific place, every surface accounted for. He'd spent 6 years making it that way after he bought it, because the previous owner had run it like a junkyard, and Ethan had spent the first year just finding out what was there. He backed the Mustang off the trailer at 6:45 in the morning and pulled it into Bay 2, the largest one, which he'd cleared the night before. He set up work lights. The overhead fluorescents were adequate, but detail work needed directed light. He got out his camera and started the documentation process, which was how every serious restoration started. Photograph everything, every panel, every connection, every section of wiring, every component. Create a complete visual record of the car as found. This took 4 hours. Ray arrived at 8. He stood in the bay door for a while, not saying anything, watching Ethan work. That's a car, Ray said finally. Yes, it is. The billionaire's car. Her father's car. Ray walked around it slowly, the same way Ethan had in the storage unit. Ray was 61, had a gray beard, and wore the same brand of canvas workshirt every day in a rotating series of identical garments. He had opinions about cars the way academics have opinions about literature. Informed, structured, occasionally heated. Paint's actually not as bad as I thought it would be, Ray said. I know. Engine? Numbers matching block. The internals are going to need a lot of work. Carb is shot, wiring is a significant project. Ray crouched by the driver's door sill. Previous work done? Not that I've found. Seems like original throughout. Ray stood, put his hands in his pockets. 3 specialists walked away. Yeah. You're not going to walk away. No. Ray nodded like this confirmed something he'd already decided. All right. What do you need me to do first? And that was Ray. That was how Ray operated. You tell him the situation, he asks the essential questions, he gets to work. No drama, no skepticism, just, what do you need? Ethan pointed to the engine compartment. I need a complete inventory of what's there and what it's going to need. Separate list for what can be restored versus what needs to be sourced. And I need it done carefully. I want to understand every choice the original builder made before I start changing anything. You mean before you start undoing 40 years of sitting? Before I understand 40 years of sitting, Ethan corrected. Ray smiled, just a little. Smart, Boab. The first week was the discovery week. This was always how it went. The first week of a serious restoration was less about doing and more about learning. You disassemble carefully, you document everything, you find out what the car is actually made of under the surface presentation. The Mustang had stories in its body. Ethan found them slowly. The driver's side rear quarter panel had a repair, not visible from outside, but evident in how the metal behaved when he began careful disassembly. Someone had done bodywork there, probably in the mid-70s, and done it well. The repair was invisible to the eye, but you could feel the slight variation in the metal if you knew what you were feeling for. A minor collision, maybe. Something that happened and got fixed and then got forgotten under decades of paint. The engine block, when he got deep into the compartment, showed more evidence of careful preparation for storage than he'd first realized. Whoever had put this car away had done it thoughtfully. The cylinders had been treated, certain components protected specifically against long-term inactivity. This was not a car that had been abandoned. It had been preserved with intention, which made it stranger that it had sat so long without anyone touching it. Someone had clearly cared enough to prepare it properly, and then left it. The interior came apart layer by layer. The seat foam was compressed and cracked, but the frames were solid. The carpet was a total loss. Moisture had gotten under the cover at some point, probably in a facility change years ago, and the original carpet had deteriorated. The door panels were largely intact, which was a minor miracle. The dashboard's wood grain applique had shrunk and separated, but the dash structure itself was sound. Ethan worked long hours. He was in the shop by 6 most mornings, left by 7 or 8 at night. Dana had Lily, and Lily called every evening at 6:30, and Ethan stopped whatever he was doing to take those calls without exception. "Did you find anything interesting today?" Lily asked on the 4th night. "I found that the car's interior carpet is completely ruined." "That's bad interesting or good interesting?" "Bad interesting for the carpet, good interesting for me because now I get to find new material that matches the original." "What color was the original?" "Dark blue. They called it midnight blue, but honestly, it's just very dark blue." "That's a better name than midnight blue," Lily said. "Midnight is a time, not a color." Ethan laughed, and it felt like the first time he'd laughed in a while. "You're completely right. When can I see the car?" "When it's done. When it can run." "Okay," she said, and then, "Dad, are you sleeping?" He paused. "Yes." "You do this thing where you say yes, but it means no." "I'm sleeping enough." "That's worse than just saying yes," she pointed out. "That means not enough." "Good night, Lily." "Good night. Sleep enough." On the 7th day, a Sunday, and Ethan was working anyway because the schedule didn't care what day it was, he got a call from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Mercer?" Male voice, smooth, the kind of smooth that comes from practice. "My name is Damian Cross. I don't believe we've met." Ethan set down the torque wrench he'd been holding. "No, we haven't." "I'm an investor. I have significant interests in several companies, including a stake in Ashford Industries. I understand you're working on a project for Victoria Ashford." "Who told you that?" "That's not really important. What I want to say," a small pause, calibrated, "is that I'd encourage you to be careful about the nature of what you're agreeing to. Victoria has a tendency to involve people in her situations. Her family has a history of creating problems for people who get close to them." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Is that a warning or a threat?" "It's friendly advice," Damian Cross said, "from someone who's seen how these things go." "I'm going to ask you something," Ethan said. "How did you get my number?" I have resources. Right. Ethan looked at the Mustang, which was currently partially disassembled, its engine block sitting on a stand beside it like a patient waiting for surgery. Mr. Cross, I appreciate the call. I'm going to hang up now. Mr. Mercer, if you call this number again, I'm going to report it to Ms. Ashford's legal team, Ethan said. Have a good Sunday. He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a while. Then he called Victoria. She answered in 2 rings. Ethan, a man named Damian Cross just called me, said he was an investor with a stake in Ashford Industries. He told me to be careful about getting involved with your family. The silence that followed was not surprised. It was something closer to tired. What exactly did he say? Ethan repeated it. He's trying to get to me through you, Victoria said. He's been attempting to acquire a controlling interest in the company for over a year. He's methodical. Another pause. I'm sorry he contacted you. That shouldn't have happened. How did he get my number? He has people. He always has people. She sounded like someone who'd been fighting a war for so long that the enemy's tactics had stopped surprising her. Ethan, I should tell you, this is going to get more complicated before it gets simpler. Cross has been escalating. If he's reaching out to you directly, it means he's trying to find leverage. What does my restoring a car have to do with corporate leverage? She was quiet for a moment. The memorial gala isn't just a tribute to my father. It's an opportunity. There are board members, investors, key stakeholders attending. A successful public moment, something emotionally significant. It matters. It shifts perception. Cross knows that. She paused. He also may know more about the letter than I thought. Ethan went very still. He knows about the letter? I don't know what he knows. But I'm going to find out. Her voice was precise, each word placed carefully. Keep working. Don't engage with him again, and if he sends anyone in person, call me before you call anyone else. Victoria. He said her first name deliberately, to cut through the professional distance she was building around herself. What does the letter say? A long pause. It says that my father owed you a debt, she said finally. That he knew something was done to you that was unjust, and that he didn't intervene when he could have. It doesn't give details. Just that fact. Another pause. And when she spoke again, the precision was still there, but something under it had frayed slightly. He says he's sorry. To you. Through me. As if I'm supposed to be the one to deliver it. Ethan sat down on the stool beside his workbench. He says he was afraid, Victoria continued, that the people involved were too powerful, and he made a choice to protect himself and the company, and he spent the rest of his life knowing it was the wrong choice. The shop was very quiet. The Mustang sat on its stands, half dismantled, its secrets already beginning to surface. I need to know the details, Ethan said. His voice was steady, which took effort. Not tonight, but I need to know everything in that letter before we go further. I know, she said. I'm investigating the specific events. I'm going to have something more concrete in the next few days. When I do, she stopped, started again. When I do, I'll come to the shop, and we'll talk about all of it. Okay, keep working, she said again. He stayed in the shop for 2 more hours after that call, but he didn't get much done. He mostly stood beside the Mustang with his hands on the edge of the engine compartment, looking at the place where the dashboard met the firewall, thinking about what it meant that a man he'd never met had written his name in a hidden letter in a car and let it sit there for how long? Long enough. He was 32 years old. Whatever had happened to his career, the accusation, the sudden destruction of everything he'd built in his first years as an engineer, he'd been 20. 20 years old at his first real job, still figuring out how the world worked. He'd lost everything and never fully understood why. And then he'd spent 12 years building something smaller and simpler because it was the only thing he could figure out how to do. And now a dead man was reaching back through 40 years of silence, through a car that had sat preserved and waiting, to tell him that somebody knew. That somebody had always known. He put his hand flat on the Mustang's firewall. All right, he said to the car, to the empty shop, to nobody in particular. He went back to work. By the end of the second week, the engine block was on the stand and completely dismantled. Ethan had found what he expected to find, and some things he hadn't. The head gaskets were gone, expected. The camshaft showed wear beyond what should have occurred in a car with relatively low mileage for its year, which was unexpected and interesting. The cylinders needed boring, which was standard. What was not standard was the crack. It was hairline, not visible without the right light and the right angle, running from the water jacket on the passenger side toward the deck surface. Not catastrophic, not yet, but the kind of thing that would become catastrophic if you tried to run the engine without addressing it. This was why the specialists had reported the block was too degraded. They hadn't been entirely wrong. They'd found this crack and decided it was a death sentence. Ethan looked at it under magnification for a long time. He called a machinist he knew in Providence, a man named Patel, who had opinions about everything and was wrong about almost none of them. He described what he was looking at. Hairline? Patel said. Hairline. Definitely not through the wall, surface crack extending from the water jacket. Propagated toward the deck? Yes, but slowly. The crack face is old. This is not recent damage. Patel made a thinking sound. Magnaflux it first. Get the exact extent. If it's what you're describing, block welding is viable. Not easy, not cheap, but viable. You'd need someone with the right setup. I know someone. Who? Pete Garvey, up in Vermont. He does vintage blocks. Another thinking sound. Garvey's good, Patel conceded. If you can get it to him, he can tell you if it's savable. Ethan thanked him and called Pete Garvey, who was delighted in the way that specialists are delighted when confronted with a genuine puzzle. 40-year-old Mustang block, Pete said. Numbers matching? Numbers matching. I haven't welded one of those in a while. You'd better bring it up here yourself. I don't want this shipped. I'll drive it up Thursday. Good. And bring the head measurements when you come. I'll want to look at everything together. Ethan had told Victoria the job was possible. He still believed that, but he was beginning to understand in a more specific way what possible was going to cost, both in money and in hours. He called her to update her on the crack. Is it fixable? She asked. I believe so. It'll cost extra. The machining work is specialized, and it'll take a few extra days that I have to account for in the schedule. Do it, she said. No hesitation. Victoria, do you know what your father's connection to me was? Specifically? It's becoming... He stopped. I'm having trouble focusing on a car that might be connected to my past without knowing how it's connected. She was quiet for a moment. I'm close to having something. Give me until the end of the week. End of the week, he said. He drove the block to Vermont on Thursday. Pete Garvey met him in his shop, which was a converted dairy barn that smelled of metal and old coffee, and spent 40 minutes examining the block under various lights and with various instruments. Huh, Pete said finally. That's not a reassuring sound. It's not unreassuring either. Look here. He positioned a light at an angle that revealed the full extent of the crack. See how it terminates? Right there. It hasn't propagated further in, I'm estimating, 15 to 20 years. The crack was present and growing early in the car's life, and then something stabilized it. Slight material stress relief, maybe, or very careful storage conditions. It was stored very carefully. That would do it. Keep a cracked block in controlled temperature and humidity, no thermal cycling. It can sit stable for decades. Pete ran his thumb along the crack's path. The previous owner was keeping this from getting worse. Ethan stared at the crack. He was protecting it. Whatever his reason, yes. Pete set down his instrument. I can weld this. I'd want to do a full thermal cycle after, let it settle, then re-magnaflux to confirm. 3 weeks for the whole process, accounting for cure time. I only have 6 weeks total from now. Pete made a face. It'll be tight, but I can prioritize it if you get me the rest of the measurements I need today. They spent the afternoon in Pete's barn with the block on the stand, measuring and discussing and occasionally disagreeing. And when Ethan drove back to Millbrook that night, he ran the numbers in his head and found that the math still worked, barely, if nothing else went wrong. He was experienced enough to know that something else would go wrong. That was the nature of old cars. You solved one problem and uncovered another. The work wasn't linear. It spiraled, it doubled back, it surprised you. The mechanics who walked away from hard projects were usually the ones who needed the path forward to be clear from the beginning. Ethan had learned, through 7 years of running this shop, and before that through the destruction of a career he'd built on analytical precision, that very few things worth doing had a clear path from the beginning. You started. You found out what was there. You adapted. He got back to Millbrook at 10 at night. The shop was locked and dark. He let himself in, turned on the lights in Bay 2, and stood for a while looking at the Mustang's partial skeleton, body shell on its stands, interior stripped, engine absent for Vermont. He took out his phone and looked at the photograph from Victoria's folder. The car as it had appeared in 1999, complete and painted, taken under studio lighting that made it look almost alive. He thought about what it would look like running, what it would sound like, a properly rebuilt 390 FE V8 with the correct exhaust, the specific bass rumble that those engines produce that no modern car could replicate. He thought about the gala and about Victoria presenting this car to a room full of people, and about what that moment would mean to her. He thought about the letter and the debt and a dead man's regret locked inside a dashboard for decades. He turned off the lights and went home. The next morning, Victoria Ashford called him at 7:45. Her voice was steady, but it had the careful control of someone working to keep it that way. "I know what happened to you," she said. "I know what my father knew. And I know who did it." Ethan sat down on the steps outside his shop in the morning cold, and he listened. The Mustang waits in Millbrook, its engine in Vermont, its secrets only beginning to surface. And in a downtown Hartford office, a man named Damian Cross is watching closely, because he knows that what was buried inside that car is more dangerous to him than any legal filing Victoria Ashford has yet attempted. The morning air outside the shop was cold enough to show his breath, and Ethan sat on the concrete steps with the phone pressed to his ear and listened to Victoria Ashford dismantle the last 12 years of his life in about 8 minutes. She didn't do it dramatically. That was the thing. She spoke the way someone speaks when they've spent days assembling information and have decided that the most honest thing they can do is deliver it plainly, without dressing it up. 15 years ago, she began, when you were working at Harlan Voss Manufacturing in Boston, you were part of a research team developing a thermal efficiency system for industrial equipment. A patent application was submitted under your name and 2 colleagues. 3 months after submission, an accusation was made that you had stolen core intellectual property from a competing firm, Cortex Solutions, and incorporated it into the Harlan Voss application. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. He hadn't heard the name Cortex Solutions spoken aloud in a very long time. He'd worked very hard to stop hearing it in his head. The accusation was investigated, Victoria continued. You were suspended pending review. The review found… what? Inconclusive, Ethan said. His voice came out flat. They said the evidence was inconclusive, which was their way of saying they believed the accusation but couldn't prove it fully. I was let go. The patent application was withdrawn. My 2 colleagues kept their jobs. He stopped. One of them got promoted 6 months later. Yes, she said quietly, because one of your colleagues was the source of the accusation. Ethan already knew this. He'd known it for 12 years, the way you know something that nobody will confirm, in your bones, in the specific ache of an injustice you can see but can't prove. Having it said plainly by someone who had documentation was a different thing than knowing it. It hit somewhere lower. His name was Gerald Stapp, Ethan said. We shared an office for 2 years. Gerald Stapp was being paid, Victoria said, not by Cortex Solutions, by a man named Warren Hollis, who was at the time a senior acquisitions director at a firm called Meridian Capital. Meridian had financial interests in Cortex Solutions and had been losing ground to the Harlan Voss thermal efficiency work. The accusation was manufactured to kill the patent application and discredit the engineering team behind it. Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He watched his own breath make small clouds and disappear. My father, Victoria said, and here the control in her voice developed a hairline fracture, barely audible, was on the Meridian Capital Advisory Board at the time. He wasn't involved in the decision. He didn't know what Hollis was doing until after the accusation had already been filed and the damage was already done. She stopped. But he found out, and he stayed quiet. Because? Because Meridian Capital had just invested heavily in Ashford Industries. Because Warren Hollis told him very clearly that if he interfered, that investment would be pulled and 300 Ashford employees would lose their jobs within a year. And my father, another stop, longer. My father decided that 300 people he was responsible for outweighed one person he'd never met. Ethan stared at the parking lot. A sparrow was picking at something near the chain link. The morning was very ordinary. He was wrong, Victoria said. He knew he was wrong. That's in the letter. He doesn't try to justify it. He just says he chose, and that the choice ate at him, and that he couldn't put the car away and then bring it back because it felt like bringing back the version of himself that made that choice. She exhaled. He hid the letter in the Mustang about 2 years before he died. I don't know if he planned to tell me about it or if he just needed somewhere to put it. Where is Warren Hollis now? Ethan asked. Retired, but his former firm, Meridian Capital, merged 4 years ago with the company now known as Cross Capital Partners. Ethan went still. Damien Cross, he said. Damien Cross acquired Meridian's assets, its portfolio, and its principals when he structured the merger, including Warren Hollis, who served as a senior advisor to Cross Capital for 2 years after the merger before retiring. Her voice was very careful now. I don't know yet whether Cross has direct knowledge of what Hollis did, but I know that he has Meridian's records, which means if there's documentation of what happened to you, and there may be, Cross may have access to it. Ethan stood up from the steps. He needed to be standing. That's why he called me. Yes, he's not trying to warn you away from the restoration. He's trying to find out how much I know. If you're rattled, if you back away, it tells him that the letter has enough in it to be dangerous to him. She paused. And if it's dangerous to him, it means the documentation exists somewhere, and he knows where it is. Ethan walked to the edge of the parking lot. The sparrows scattered. Victoria, I need you to understand something. Okay. If I keep working on this car, and if what you're describing is accurate, and if Damien Cross has reason to feel threatened by what gets uncovered, he stopped. I have a daughter. She's 7 years old, and she's currently at my sister's house because I took this job, and I need to know what I'm agreeing to before I agree to it. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone calculating. It was the silence of someone who had heard something true and was treating it seriously. That's fair, Victoria said. Completely fair. And I want to be honest with you. I don't know exactly how far Cross would go. I know he's tried to damage my reputation through the press. I know he's put pressure on board members privately. I know he's thorough and patient and doesn't leave obvious fingerprints. She paused. But I don't know if he would go further than that. I genuinely don't know. And the letter? Ethan said. What's in the letter? Does it give you legal leverage? It gives me a place to start. It's not proof. It's a dead man's confession that doesn't name documents or specific transactions. I need to find the documentation that confirms what he describes, which I'm working on. Ethan turned and looked at the shop. The bay door was down, and through the small window he could see the white glare of the work lights he'd left on over the Mustang's shell. I'm going to keep working on the car, he said. Ethan, I heard everything you said. I'm going to keep working on it. He said it the way you say something when you've decided before you fully understood you were deciding. But I need 2 things. I need you to tell me the moment anything changes. If Cross makes a move, if you find documentation, if anything shifts. You don't protect me from information. I need to know what's happening. Agreed. And I need you to make sure my daughter stays somewhere Cross can't find a reason to look. A beat of silence. I'll arrange additional security for your sister's address. Discreet. She won't need to know unless something happens. She'll need to know it exists, Ethan said. I'll tell her myself. I don't keep things from Dana. She can handle it, and she needs to be able to make her own choice about whether to keep Lily. Of course. Another pause. What's the second thing? That was 2 things, security and honesty. Right. He could hear her almost smile. I count differently under stress. So do I, he said. So do I. He went back inside and stood next to the Mustang's empty shell and put one hand against the firewall and breathed for a moment. Then he picked up his tools and got back to work, because that was the only thing that made any of this feel manageable. Dana took the call that evening better than he'd expected and worse than he'd hoped. She was quiet through the explanation, and then she asked the question he'd expected. "Are you sure about this, Ethan?" "No." "That's the wrong answer." "I know, but it's the true one." He was sitting in his truck in the shop parking lot because the shop itself had too many echoes right now. "The man who did this to me may be connected to the man trying to take Victoria's company, and Victoria is the only person who's ever shown up with actual information about what happened." He paused. "I've been carrying this for 12 years, and not knowing is heavier than you think." Dana was quiet for a while. "I know it is," she said. "I watched you carry it." Another pause. "Lily stays here as long as you need. I'll talk to Marco about the security thing. He won't like it, but he'll understand." Marco was Dana's husband, a high school football coach who did, in fact, understand most things when they were explained directly. "But Ethan, you call me every day, not every other day." "Every day." "Every day," he agreed. "And if this gets dangerous, actually dangerous, not just complicated, I'll pull back." "Will you?" He thought about it honestly. "I'll try." Dana made a sound that communicated everything she thought about that answer. Then she said, "Lily wants to say goodnight." Lily came on the phone and told him that she'd decided the car should be named once it was finished, that all cars deserved names, and that she was workshopping candidates. She also told him that Aunt Dana made her eat asparagus for dinner, and she wanted the record to reflect that she had eaten it without complaint. "That's very mature," Ethan said. "I know," Lily said. "Good night." "Good night, Lil." He sat in the truck for another 10 minutes after the call ended, looking at nothing. Then he went inside and worked until midnight. The block came back from Pete Garvey in Vermont on a Friday afternoon, and Pete drove it down himself, which meant he wanted to see the rest of the car and have an excuse to spend a few hours talking about it. That was fine with Ethan. Pete's company was uncomplicated, and uncomplicated had become scarce. "She cleaned up well," Pete said, walking around the Mustang's body shell. Ethan had been doing body work while the block was away. The driver's rear quarter panel had been straightened and the hairline rust at the door sills addressed with careful cutting and patching. The shell was in primer now, gray and matte, and it looked stripped down but solid. The bones were good. The weld held? Magnaflux was clean, Pete confirmed. "She'll hold. I'd recommend keeping her out of sustained high RPM for the first 500 miles. Let everything settle properly. But mechanically, she's sound." "Good." Ethan looked at the block sitting on Pete's furniture dolly. "Let's get her on the stand." They spent the afternoon reinstalling the block, and Pete stayed for dinner. Takeout from the Chinese place on Route 7, eaten sitting on stools in the shop. And they talked about engines and about Pete's daughter who was starting college in the fall, and about the peculiar sadness of restoring things to a condition they were never quite in again, which was something Pete thought about philosophically, and Ethan thought about more literally right now. "What's the story with this car?" Pete asked. He wasn't being nosy exactly. He was a man who found context useful. 3 specialists walked away. "You didn't. There's a reason." "The owner's family has a connection to my past," Ethan said. "It's complicated. Most things with this kind of money attached are." Pete ate a bite of fried rice. "The owner, the billionaire woman?" "Her father originally. He's gone now." Pete nodded slowly. "Old cars carry things," he said. "I've been doing this 30 years and I still believe that. Not in any mystical way. Just a car that sat that long didn't sit for no reason. Something happened and the car became the placeholder for it." He looked at the Mustang. "You figure out what it was?" "I'm working on it," Ethan said. Pete left at 8. Ethan installed the freshened carburetor, rebuilt by a specialist in Springfield he'd shipped it to 3 weeks ago, and torqued it to spec, and then stood back and looked at what was beginning, slowly and grudgingly, to resemble an engine again. He was beginning to believe they could actually do this. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week, a car pulled into his lot that he didn't recognize. Not a Mercedes this time. A dark blue Audi, newer, driven by a man who got out and stood by the hood and looked at the shop with the expression of someone who'd been told to deliver a message in person. Ethan came out wiping his hands. The man was mid-30s, trim, in a jacket that cost more than Ethan's mortgage payment. He had the practiced pleasantness of someone who worked in a professional environment where pleasantness was a tool. "Mr. Mercer, my name is Philip Crane. I'm a consultant working with Cross Capital Partners." He produced a card and held it out. Ethan didn't take it. "Mr. Cross already called me once. I told him I didn't want further contact." Philip Crane kept the card extended a moment, then put it back in his pocket without apparent offense. "I understand. I'm not here on behalf of Mr. Cross personally. I'm here to deliver a message." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope. "This is a formal letter noting certain concerns about the scope and validity of the restoration project you've been retained for. It's advisory in nature." "Put it on the hood," Ethan said. Crane set the envelope on the hood of the nearest car in the lot, a Honda Civic waiting on a brake job. "The concerns are legal in nature," Crane said, with the tone of someone reciting lines, specifically regarding the provenance of certain components that may be used in the restoration, and questions about whether the project timeline and budget represent appropriate stewardship of Ashford Industries' resources, given the current governance situation. He paused. "That's all." "Is there anything in that envelope that's actually legally significant?" Ethan said. "Or is it intimidation with letterhead?" Crane's pleasant expression didn't change. "I'd encourage you to have a lawyer review it. I'll call Ms. Ashford's legal team." "Of course." He started back toward the Audi. Then, without turning around, "Mr. Mercer, there's a school in Millbrook, elementary school on Chester Avenue. My understanding is your daughter attends there." Ethan went cold. Not a dramatic cold, a specific, physical cold, like the temperature had dropped around him and him alone. Crane got into the Audi and pulled out of the lot at a careful, law-abiding speed. Ethan stood in the lot for a count of 5. Then he went inside, picked up his phone, and called Victoria. While it rang, he walked into Bay 2 and put his hand on the Mustang's roof, which had become, without him planning it, something he did when he needed to be in contact with something solid. Victoria answered before the second ring. "Philip Crane just left my lot," he said. He kept his voice level. "He mentioned my daughter's school, by name." The silence on her end lasted exactly 2 seconds. "I'm calling my legal team in the next 5 minutes. I need you to take photographs of whatever he left and send them to this number." She was already moving. He could hear it in her voice, the shift from contained to operational. "Ethan, listen to me. Can Lily go somewhere other than school tomorrow? Not your sister's house, somewhere Cross's people haven't mapped. I'll figure it out. Who in your life doesn't know about this job?" He thought. "My friend Marcus. He's got kids Lily's age. They've known each other since they were babies. Cross would have no way to connect that. Call him now, after you send me those photos." A pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had something in it that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite guilt. "I'm sorry. He wasn't supposed to go near your family." "He didn't go near her. He just wanted me to know he could." Ethan looked at the Mustang. "This is an escalation." "Yes. Which means what he's afraid of is significant." "Yes," she said again, and this time there was something harder underneath it. "It means we're closer to something he doesn't want found." That night, he called Marcus, who was a good enough friend to ask only the necessary questions and agree to the rest without drama. Then he drove to Dana's, sat at the kitchen table while Dana made coffee, and Marco pretended to be in another room but was obviously listening, and told Lily that she was going to spend a few days at Marcus's house with his kids, which she received as good news because Marcus's kids had a trampoline. He didn't tell her about Crane or the school comment. He told himself that was protecting her. He knew it was also protecting himself from having to see her face change when she understood something had gotten into the air around her. He drove back to Millbrook at 10 at night and worked on the car until 2 in the morning, reinstalling rebuilt suspension components and the physical work of it, the weight of the parts, the specific torque requirements, the need to get the numbers exactly right, was the only thing that kept the anger from becoming something he couldn't use. Victoria came to the shop the following Thursday. She arrived with a woman named Helen from her legal team, and they sat in Ethan's office, and Helen laid a series of documents on the desk. "The letter Crane delivered is legally frivolous," Helen said. She was methodical and precise, and had the energy of someone who had taken a lot of threats apart to show they were hollow and had enjoyed every instance. "It's designed to create confusion, not to pursue actual legal claims. It's a pressure tactic, documented." She set the last document on top of the others. "What's not frivolous is the parallel campaign being run against you publicly." Ethan looked at Victoria. "What campaign?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "There's a profile piece being shopped to 2 trade publications, Engineering and Manufacturing Press. It revisits the accusation from 15 years ago, the Harlan Voss incident. Someone is feeding the story to journalists, framing it as a relevant question about your credentials to handle this restoration." Ethan felt something drop in his chest. Not surprising, completely expected, actually, given the pattern. And still, somehow, it landed. "Who's the source?" "Unnamed, but the information is specific enough that it came from someone with access to the original complaint documentation." Helen tapped the top of her document stack. "We're pursuing an injunction against publication pending our own investigation. It's not guaranteed, but it should slow things down." "Gerald Stapp," Ethan said. "He's the one who filed the original accusation. Is he still in the industry?" Helen glanced at Victoria, who gave a slight nod. "He runs a small engineering consultancy in New Hampshire," Helen said. "He has an ongoing contractual relationship with Cross Capital Partners that began about 18 months ago." Ethan was quiet for a moment. 18 months ago is when the hostile takeover attempt started." "Yes," Helen said. Ethan looked at the ceiling, then he looked at his desk, at the crayon drawing of the car that Lily had made when she was 4. He looked at it for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Anything from your time at Harlan Voss," Helen said. "Emails, records, anything you kept, even if it seems minor." "I kept everything," Ethan said. "I kept everything because I always knew it might matter someday. It's in a storage unit in Connecticut, 2 boxes, labeled by year." Helen wrote something down. "Can we access that?" "I'll take you there Saturday." Victoria had been quiet through most of this. Now she spoke. "Ethan?" She waited until he looked at her. "I want you to know that I understand what this is costing you. Not the money, the rest of it, the having to go back." She said it carefully, and he understood that she'd thought about how to say it for a while. "My father made a choice that made this harder for you for 15 years. The least I can do is make sure you don't have to face the next part of it alone." He didn't know what to say to that. He said, "Okay," which was insufficient, but it was what he had. After Helen left, Victoria stayed. She stood at the bay door and looked at the Mustang, which was beginning now to look like itself again. The engine reinstalled, but not yet running. The bodywork done and ready for paint prep. The interior stripped to metal and waiting. "It looks better," she said. "It's getting there. My father used to talk about this car when I was young. Not often. He wasn't a sentimental man, not openly, but sometimes." She was quiet for a moment. "He said the engine sounded like something that had figured out exactly what it was supposed to do, like it wasn't fighting itself." She paused. "He said he'd never heard another engine that sounded quite like that." "The 390FE is a particular engine," Ethan said. "When it's right, there's nothing else like it. There's a specific—" He stopped because he was about to go deep into mechanical detail and wasn't sure she wanted that. "Tell me," she said. "There's a specific acoustic frequency. When the carburetor and the intake and the exhaust are all in calibration, it produces a harmonic that you feel in your chest more than you hear it. Engineers sometimes call it a mechanical resonance, but that makes it sound clinical. It doesn't sound clinical." He looked at the engine. "It sounds like the car is breathing." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "He described it exactly like that," she said. "He said it sounds like breathing." She glanced at Ethan. "I didn't know that was a real thing. I thought he was being poetic." "He wasn't." She nodded slowly. Then she walked to the passenger side of the car and ran her hand along the roofline, carefully, the way Ethan had learned to touch old metal, like you're being introduced. "When you restore a car this old," she said, Do you ever feel like I don't know how to phrase this, like you're having a conversation with whoever built it? Ethan said. She looked at him. Yes, exactly. Yeah, he said. You do. Every choice they made, you're discovering and responding to. What they prioritized, what they cut corners on, where they were proud of the work. He looked at the car. Your father didn't cut corners. This car was built for someone who intended to take care of it. She looked away. He was good at taking care of things, she said. That was the genuinely true part of him. Sometimes the things he took care of and the things he should have taken care of weren't the same things. Ethan didn't answer because there wasn't an answer. It was just the truth of who the man had been, and it was hers to hold, not his to comment on. They stood there a while in the quiet of the shop, on opposite sides of the Mustang. The days after that had a particular quality, a grinding forward momentum punctuated by things that tried to stop it. The press inquiry against his name moved slowly because Helen's team was effective at slowing it. Ray developed a source for the correct vintage upholstery material. It took 11 calls to 4 different suppliers, and the material that finally arrived was a slightly different texture than original, which was going to bother Ethan more than it would bother anyone else. But that was how it always went. The correct headliner material took a separate sourcing battle. Ethan ordered 3 different compounds for the paint prep work and rejected 2 before finding the one that behaved correctly on the existing base. He stopped sleeping well around the 4th week. Not insomnia exactly. He just slept badly, in chunks, waking at 3 in the morning with specific thoughts about the wiring harness or about Gerald Stapp's face, which he still remembered clearly from their shared office 15 years ago. Stapp had been a competent engineer and a person who laughed easily at things that weren't quite funny. Ethan had trusted him the way you trust someone who shares your workspace and brings you coffee occasionally and borrows your stapler. Not a close friend, just present. The ordinary presence of someone who turned out to be doing something unforgivable, quietly, while sharing your stapler. He replaced the entire wiring harness over 4 days. It was the most methodical work on the project. Every circuit traced, every connection verified, every ground point cleaned and rebuilt. Ray helped with the interior lighting circuits, and they worked in a companionable silence, broken occasionally by one of them saying a wire gauge or a connector type. On the 2nd day of the wiring work, Ray said, without looking up from what he was doing, "You're not sleeping. I'm sleeping. You're here before I am in the morning, and you're here when I leave at night, and you look like that." Ray gestured vaguely at Ethan's face. "Whatever you're working out in your head, the car will still be here in the morning." "I know." "Do you?" Ethan stopped and looked at Ray. Ray was 61 and had been divorced twice and had a son who called him on Sundays and 2 bad knees from 40 years on concrete floors. He was not a man who gave life advice often, but when he did, it came from somewhere genuine. "The job is complicated," Ethan said. "All the good ones are." "Not just mechanically," Ray nodded. "I figured." He went back to what he was doing. "Whatever it is, you'll get through it the same way you get through the car. One connection at a time. You don't fix a whole electrical system. You fix this wire, and then that wire." Ethan thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. At the end of week 4, Victoria came back to the shop with news. She arrived at 7 in the evening when the light was going and Ethan was finishing the last of the wiring verification. She looked different than she had before, not better or worse, but like something had shifted in the structure of her face, like she'd been carrying something at a particular angle and had shifted the weight. She had a folder with her. "Helen found documentation," she said. "Not from my father's letter, from the Meridian Capital Archive. When Cross acquired Meridian, the digital records were consolidated. Our legal team found a forensic accountant who can access certain transaction records." She put the folder on the workbench. Warren Hollis's expenses during the period of the Harlan Voss accusation include payments to Gerald Stapp through a shell account. The amounts correspond to the timeline. It's not complete proof by itself, but it's the first objective evidence that the accusation was paid for. Ethan looked at the folder. He didn't open it. "That's enough to pursue legal action against Stapp?" he asked. "That's enough to file. Helen says winning is a longer road, but the filing itself changes things." She paused. "It also changes the press narrative if we move first. Instead of Cross's people resurfacing the accusation, We're filing suit that establishes the accusation was fraudulent. Ethan picked up the folder and opened it. The top sheet was a transaction record, numbers and dates and account codes, the bloodless language of money moving between people. He read the dates. He'd been 20 years old. He'd been 20 years old and working his first real job, and somebody had written his name in a payment record and destroyed his life. His hands were steady. He was surprised they were steady. "I want a file," he said. "We'll need a statement from you, your account of the original accusation and its aftermath." "I'll do it." "It means going through all of it formally, documented, on record." "I know." He set the folder down. "Victoria, I've been going through all of it in my head for 12 years. Going through it on paper will be easier." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Then, there's something else." He waited. "Cross knows we have the documentation. Somehow, I don't know the source, he knows we've accessed the Meridian records. Helen became aware of it this afternoon." She said it directly, which he'd come to understand was her way of handling things that made her angry. She didn't build up to them. "He's accelerating the board campaign. He's called an emergency session for next week, claiming financial mismanagement." She paused. "He's going to argue that the restoration project is a misuse of company resources, and that my personal involvement in it demonstrates emotional instability in my management of the company." "He's going to use the car," Ethan said. "He's going to use everything he can reach." Ethan looked at the Mustang. The wiring was done. The engine was in. The bodywork was complete. The car was 3 to 4 weeks away from running. Paint, interior installation, final mechanical assembly, tuning. "Then we need the car to run before the board meeting," he said. Victoria shook her head. "The board meeting is in 10 days. "I know. Ethan, you told me 8 weeks originally, and we're at 4. You can't compress 3 more weeks into 10 days. He looked at the car. He looked at what was done and what remained, and he ran the numbers the way he ran numbers, which was fast and without sentiment. "I can't have it driving in 10 days, he said, "but I might be able to have it running. In the garage. Engine turning, everything working, documented, and presentable." He paused. "Not road ready, not gala ready, but provably functional." Victoria looked at the car. She was quiet for a moment. "What would you need?" "Ray full-time, no other jobs. A painter who can work fast without cutting corners. I know one, he owes me a favor. 2 more days of parts that I order tonight." He stopped. "And I need you to trust that provably functional is enough to make the point. That the car runs. That it exists. That your father's wish is being honored." She was quiet for another moment. "Can you do that?" she said. "Not should you. Not in theory. Can you actually do that?" He looked at the Mustang one more time, the car that had sat 40 years, the car with the letter, the car that had somehow managed to become the center of 2 people's need to set something right. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm going to try." Victoria held his gaze. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when something was decided and there was no point in discussing it further. "Then try." She left at 8. Ethan called Ray and told him to clear his schedule. He called the painter, a quick-handed man named Ortega, who worked out of a shop in Bridgeport, and explained the situation, and Ortega said several things in Spanish that Ethan didn't understand, and then agreed to come Saturday. Then Ethan turned back to the car. He pulled up the work lights. He got out the next part that needed doing, the fuel system, which needed a new pump and new lines and a clean tank, and he started. The shop was empty and lit in that particular way it got at night, shadows at the edges and everything in the light very clear and precise. The engine sat in the block, assembled and waiting. The body shell was around it, primer gray and solid. It was going to take everything he had. He reached under the car for the fuel tank retaining strap, and his hands found the work, and he disappeared into it the way he always did when the path forward was uncertain. One task at a time, one connection at a time, building towards something that wasn't there yet, but was becoming. Outside, Millbrook went quiet. The road was empty. The sign over the shop door creaked in the wind. Inside Bay 2, the lights stayed on. Ortega arrived Saturday morning at 6:45, which was 15 minutes earlier than Ethan had asked him, and told him something about how seriously he was taking the favor. He drove a van with his shop name on the side, Ortega Custom Finishing, Bridgeport, CT, and he got out and looked at the Mustang's primer gray shell the way a surgeon looks at a patient before the first cut. "Tell me about the original color," he said, before even saying hello. "Highland green," Ethan said. "Factory code M, 1967 original." Ortega walked to the driver's door and crouched, looking at where the primer met the door jamb edge, where a thin whisper of original color was still visible in the door's interior seam. He pulled a small magnifying loupe from his jacket pocket and held it to that whisper of color. "Not just green," Ortega said. "There's gold in it. See how it shifts in the light?" Ethan crouched beside him. He could see it. The original paint's depth, the particular quality that 40 years and careful storage had given the surviving traces. A color that charts described as Highland green, but which had something more complex underneath. A green that was almost olive in shadow and almost gold in direct light. "That's the original formula. They don't mix it the same way anymore," Ortega said. "I'm going to have to do 3 test panels before I commit to the main body. Maybe 4. He stood. "You said 10 days. 10 days for running and presentable. Not concourse, not show quality." Ortega gave him a look that communicated what he thought about the difference between those things. "The prep is already done? Body is straight, surface is right. Who did the body work?" "I did." Ortega walked to the rear quarter panel, the one with the old repair, and ran his palm across it slowly. He stopped, ran it back, stopped again. "This repair. 70s work, not mine." "It's good," Ortega said, with the reluctance of someone who doesn't give compliments easily. "I can work with this." He straightened. "You want it right or you want it fast?" "Both," Ethan said. Ortega looked at him for a moment. "Nobody wants both and gets both. I want it as right as 10 days allows." "That," Ortega said, "I can do." He set up in Bay 3 while Ethan took Bay 2 for the mechanical work. The shop hadn't run 2 bays simultaneously since Ethan had bought it, and there was a period of adjustment where they figured out how not to be in each other's way. Ortega played music while he worked, a Spanish language station that Ethan couldn't understand but that had a useful rhythm to it. Ray arrived at 7:30 and went straight to the fuel system, where Ethan had left off the night before. The 10 days started. The first 2 were about the fuel system and exhaust. Ethan installed the new fuel pump, a period-correct mechanical unit, not a modern replacement because he was rebuilding the car it was, not the car it could have been, and ran new steel lines from tank to engine. The tank itself had been cleaned and sealed during the first week. What remained was assembly and verification. The exhaust system went in on day 2, headers first, then the Y-pipe, then the main pipes back. When he had the clamps tight and the hanger set, he crawled underneath and checked every connection twice. Ray found a problem with the front suspension that Ethan hadn't caught, a ball joint on the passenger side that had seized in a way that wasn't obvious until you put weight on it. It was a half-day delay. Ethan ordered the part on priority shipping, paid the extra cost without hesitating, and used the time to install the brake system components he'd rebuilt. Ortega's test panels appeared and disappeared. On day 3, Ethan found him comparing a painted test panel to the door seam whisper of original color under natural light, standing outside the bay door in the morning sun, moving the panel back and forth with the concentration of a man doing something he cared about. He didn't say anything to Ethan. He went back inside, mixed something different, and painted another test panel. On day 4, Ortega said, "I think I have it." He brought the panel to Ethan, who held it against the original paint trace. It wasn't perfect. Ethan could see the difference if he looked for it, but in normal light, at a normal distance, it was convincing. It had the depth, the shift from olive to gold. It was right in the way that mattered. "Do it," Ethan said. Victoria called every evening between 7 and 8. The calls had changed from the early weeks. Less formal, more direct. She didn't lead with status updates anymore. She led with whatever was most pressing, which was usually the legal situation. On day 5, she told him that Helen had filed the civil suit against Gerald Stapp. The filing included the transaction records from the Meridian archive and Ethan's formal statement, which he'd given over video call 2 days before. It had taken 2 hours. Helen had asked careful questions, and Ethan had answered them in the same flat, controlled voice he used for giving technical assessments, because it was the only way to get through it. The press found the filing, Victoria said, within 4 hours. That was predictable. Yes. Helen says it helps us. The story is now about the lawsuit rather than about the old accusation. The frame is different. She paused. 2 of the board members Cross has been pressuring reached out to my office today. They want to hear my side before the board session. Is that a good sign? It's a sign that Cross's position is shakier than he wants it to look. She paused. How's the car? Paint started today. Mechanical is largely done. I'm doing final assembly tomorrow and Tuesday. Is it going to run? I think so. I won't know until I turn the key. That's an uncomfortable amount of uncertainty. Welcome to restoration work. A short silence. Ethan, the board session has been moved to next Friday. That's a day earlier than originally scheduled. He recalculated. That's 9 days from now. Yes, I know you said 10. I said 10 days for running and presentable. Can you do 9? He looked at the Mustang through the bay door. Ortega had the first coat on. He could see the green beginning to emerge from the primer, the color taking hold. Even at one coat, it looked extraordinary, the way the right color on the right car always does. I can try, he said. That's what you said about 8 weeks. And here we are, he said. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. Day 6 was final mechanical assembly. Ethan reinstalled the rebuilt carburetor and intake, torqued the valve covers, connected the distributor, and set the initial timing by hand. He filled the cooling system and checked every hose connection. He filled the engine with fresh oil and primed the system by turning the engine over without spark. Just the starter, just the oil pump doing its work, until the pressure gauge on his external unit showed he had full circulation. Ray was beside him for most of it, not talking much, handing him things before he asked for them, which was the particular talent of someone who'd been in a shop long enough to anticipate. At one point, Ray said, "You need to sleep tonight." "I know. Not like the last 4 nights, real sleep. The paint has to cure. I can't do anything significant until Ortega is done with the second coat tomorrow, so yes, I'll sleep." "What time did you leave last night?" Ethan didn't answer. "Right," Ray said. "Sleep tonight." He left at 10, which was early for the past week. He drove home to a house that had Lily's shoes absent from the front hall and her drawings absent from the table, and the particular quality of quiet that's different from ordinary quiet. He stood in her room for a moment. He wasn't sure why, he just did. And then he went to bed. He slept 7 hours. He dreamed about the Mustang's engine, which was either a sign that he was deeply invested in the project or that he needed a more interesting inner life. Ortega finished the second coat on day 7. The 2 of them spent an hour looking at it under different light. Bay lights, portable floods, natural light through the open door at various angles. The color moved the way old color moves, shifting with the light, never settling on one thing. It was not showroom perfect. There was a texture variation near the driver's door that Ortega pointed out before Ethan saw it, because Ortega's standards for his own work were brutal. "Nobody else will see it," Ethan said. "I'll see it," Ortega said. "Is there time to fix it?" Ortega calculated. "Yes, but it cost you a half day." "Do it." On day 8, the interior went in. Ethan and Ray had spent the previous weeks restoring what could be restored and replacing what couldn't, sourcing matching materials with the same obsessive care they'd applied to the mechanical components. The seat frames were original, rebuilt, and recovered in the correct midnight blue vinyl. And Lily had been right. It was a better name than midnight blue. It really was just very dark blue. But the name was on the original interior chart, so the name stayed. The door panels were reproductions of the correct pattern. The carpet was new but matched in weight and fiber to original spec. The headliner was a close approximation that would read correctly to any eye that wasn't measuring it. Ethan installed the instrument cluster, cleaned, all gauges verified for function, the faces restored to legibility. He installed the steering wheel. He installed the radio, which would not actually receive anything useful in the 21st century, but which was correct to the car and would look right. At 4 in the afternoon on day 8, he sat in the driver's seat of an almost complete 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback and put his hands on the wheel and looked at the instrument panel in front of him. The gauges sat at 0, waiting. He went home at 8, which for this week counted as early. Day 9 arrived with weather, a cold front pushing through Connecticut, the kind of damp gray that makes every surface in an unheated space colder than it should be. Ethan turned on the shop's space heaters at 5:30 and gave the interior an hour to come up to temperature before touching anything. Temperature mattered for starting an engine that hadn't run in 40 years, and he wasn't going to let the weather beat him at this point. Ortega came back to do the final wet sand and polish, which he did in the morning while Ethan finished the last mechanical items: the battery connections, the final timing adjustment, the idle mixture screw on the carburetor. These were the small things that people who didn't know engines thought were minor and that were actually everything. An engine that's mechanically complete but badly tuned doesn't run well. Sometimes it doesn't run at all. He bled the brake system. He rechecked the coolant level. He checked the oil again twice because it was one of those things you check twice. At 11 in the morning, Ortega rolled the car out of Bay 3 into the daylight for the final polish, and the green hit the overcast sky and stopped being just paint. The color was alive in a way that required a certain light to understand. It wasn't the flashy show car green that people expected from a Mustang. It was something richer and more complicated, the kind of color that made you want to follow the car to see what it looked like from a different angle. Ethan stood in the shop doorway and watched Ortega work the polish across the roof with steady, practiced strokes, and he felt something that he hadn't expected to feel, which was something close to grief. Not sadness exactly. The particular feeling of a thing arriving at its end. He went back inside and made sure everything was ready. At 2 o'clock, Ortega finished and rolled the car back into the bay. He coiled his polishing cord and packed his materials with the systematic precision of someone who'd done it thousands of times. And then he stood and looked at the car. "I've done better work," he said. "Not in 9 days," Ethan said. Ortega considered this. "Not in 9 days," he agreed. He looked at the car for another moment, then picked up his bag. "You're going to start it today?" "Trying to." "Call me," Ortega said. "Whatever happens." He left without ceremony, van engine receding down Millfield Road. Ray stood by the workbench with his arms folded. He'd been there for the last hour, doing small things, staying out of the way. He was good at understanding when to be present and when to be invisible, which was one of his more underappreciated qualities. "You want to do this alone?" Ray asked. Ethan thought about it. "No," he said. He'd called Victoria in the morning to tell her he thought today was the day. She'd asked if she should come, and he'd said yes without hesitating, and he'd been slightly surprised by how easily he'd said it. She arrived at 2:15. She was alone. No driver, no Helen, no suit. She was wearing a gray sweater and dark jeans, and her hair was loose, the same way she'd had it in the storage unit the first time she'd seen the letter. She walked in and stopped when she saw the car. She didn't say anything for a moment. The Mustang sat in Bay 2 under the work lights, completely assembled, every piece of chrome cleaned and reinstalled, the green paint reflecting the shop lights in that particular way it had. It looked, there was no more honest word for it, like itself, like the car had been waiting to look exactly this way and was done waiting. "Oh," she said, quietly, like it had gotten out before she could stop it. "It's not finished," Ethan said. "The detailing work could take another week. There are things I'd do differently with more time, but it's him," she said. Ethan looked at her. She was looking at the car with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the controlled executive, not the carefully managed grief. Something more direct. "The first time I saw this car, I was maybe 9 years old. I have a photograph somewhere. He's standing beside it, and he looks so proud, like it was the first thing he'd ever owned that was actually his." She stopped. "It looks like that photograph." Ethan didn't say anything. She turned to him. "Let's find out if it runs." They had established a protocol because starting an engine that had been rebuilt from significant disassembly wasn't like turning a key and hoping. There were stages. Ethan had already primed the oil system. What remained was confirming fuel delivery to the carburetor. He removed the air cleaner and checked the accelerator pump discharge, which put a clean squirt of fuel into the throat when he moved the throttle linkage, which told him fuel was present and moving, and confirming spark, which he did by pulling one plug wire, grounding it against the engine block, and cranking the starter briefly. A crisp blue arc. Spark was good. He reinstalled the air cleaner. He checked the throttle cable for full travel and smooth return. He looked at Ray, who was standing by the driver's side with his arms still folded, and Ray gave a small nod. He looked at Victoria, who was standing at the front of the car with her hands at her sides. "This might take a few attempts," he said. "First fire-up on a rebuilt engine is rarely immediate. If it takes more than 5 or 6 attempts, I'll adjust the mixture and try again. This is normal." "Okay," she said. "If there's a mechanical issue, a sound that shouldn't be there, smoke that isn't normal startup smoke, I'll shut it down immediately and diagnose. Don't be alarmed by—" "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "Start the car." He got in. He adjusted the seat, which was already set from when he'd last sat in it, but which he adjusted anyway, because it gave his hand something to do. He put his hand on the key he'd had cut from a locksmith who specialized in vintage ignition systems. A correct style key, original Pony series, not a modern blank. He looked at the gauges. All at 0. He pressed the accelerator to the floor and released it, the correct starting procedure for a carbureted engine at rest, and then held his foot lightly on the pedal, just the weight of it, and turned the key. The starter engaged. The engine turned over. 1, 2, 3 rotations, and then it caught on something and the breath of combustion came, uneven and tentative, a cylinder firing and then losing and then catching again, and for 2 seconds it sat on the edge of running, 1 foot on either side, and Ethan held the throttle exactly where it was and waited. It found itself. The idle came up rough and lumpy at first, the way a rebuilt engine always does at first fire, the carburetor needles hunting for their position, the combustion chambers filling with oil smoke from fresh assembly. The exhaust note was raw, unfiltered by the passage of miles, every small variation in the firing order audible because nothing was broken in yet. And then, over the course of about 45 seconds, it settled. The idle smoothed. The smoke from the tailpipe shifted from the blue-gray of oil burn to nearly nothing. The tatch needle, which Ethan had been watching with one eye, climbed to 900 RPM and held there, steady, with only the small natural variation of an engine finding its rhythm. The sound. He hadn't been able to predict it, even knowing the engine, even knowing the exhaust specification. You can't predict a sound until it's actually there. The 390 FE at idle was a low, deliberate thing, deeper than you expected, with a particular quality in the mid-range that wasn't quite a rumble and wasn't quite a throb, but was somewhere between them. It filled the shop in a way that was physical. You felt it in the floor, in the seat, in the steering wheel under Ethan's hands. Victoria's father had said it sounded like breathing. He'd been right. That was exactly what it was. Ethan sat in the car and listened to the engine breathe and didn't move for a moment. He checked the oil pressure gauge. It was reading correctly, solidly in the safe range. He watched the temperature gauge begin to climb from cold start, moving slowly toward operating range. Everything the gauges told him was what they should be telling him. He got out of the car. Victoria was still standing at the front of the car, and she had one hand pressed flat against the hood. Not the roof, as she'd done before, but the hood, over the engine, and her eyes were bright in a way that she probably couldn't have controlled if she'd tried, and wasn't trying to. Ray said nothing. He was leaning against the workbench with his arms still folded, looking at the engine bay with the expression of a man who had seen many engines started, and who was allowing himself, privately, to be moved by this one. Ethan stood and listened. He was listening for problems, for the knock of a bearing, for the tick of a valve clearance issue, for anything in the acoustic signature that would tell him something was wrong. He was cataloging everything he heard. What he heard was an engine running correctly, running well. After 3 minutes, he leaned into the bay and made a small adjustment to the idle mixture, half a turn on the mixture screws, and the idle dropped slightly and smoothed further. At 5 minutes, he revved it gently, watching the tack, feeling the engine's response. It pulled smoothly, no stumble, the carburetor's accelerator circuit doing its job. At 7 minutes, he reached in and shut it off. The shop was suddenly quiet. The echo of the engine's absence was almost as physical as the engine had been. "Well," Ray said. That was all he said. Victoria took her hand off the hood. She looked at Ethan. "What does that tell you?" "That the engine is fundamentally sound. I'll want to run it for a longer period, check for leaks, verify all temperatures at operating range, do a first oil change after break-in. But mechanically, it's right." He stopped. "It's right." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "My father would have—" She stopped herself, swallowed something, started again. "He would have been here for this if things had been different. He would have stood exactly where I'm standing." Ethan didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wasn't smaller than the moment. She looked at the car for a while longer. Then her phone rang and she looked at the screen and something changed in her expression. The softness closing back over, the executive returning. "It's Helen," she said. "Take it." She stepped out of the bay. Ethan could hear her through the open door, her voice shifting immediately into the precise, rapid mode she used for business. Yes. When? Which board member? What did he say specifically? Ray came to stand beside Ethan, both of them looking at the Mustang. "She gonna be all right?" Ray said. He meant the board situation, which Ethan had told him about in general terms. "I think so," Ethan said. "You think or you know?" "In this business, Ray, you think. You never know until you know." Ray nodded. "Same thing we were just talking about with the engine." "More or less," Ethan said. Victoria came back in with her phone in her hand and her expression arranged carefully in a way that told him something significant had happened. "One of Cross's primary board allies just withdrew his support for the emergency session," she said. "Apparently the lawsuit filing got enough press that he doesn't want his name associated with the motion." "That's good," Ethan said. "It changes the math considerably. Without his vote, Cross needs to work harder to build the majority he was counting on." She paused. "Helen thinks Cross is going to try a different approach now, something more aggressive and more public." "Such as?" "She doesn't know yet. But when a careful man gets his careful plan disrupted, he tends to react, and reactions are less controlled than plans." She held his gaze. "We should be ready for something in the next few days." He was ready for something in the next few days. What he wasn't ready for was the specific something that arrived. It came at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Ethan was alone in the shop. Ray had gone home at 6. Ortega had finished 2 days ago. The place was quiet in the way it got after a long project when the urgency hadn't quite lifted, but the immediate pressure had. He was doing the first extended engine run, letting the engine reach full operating temperature and hold there for 20 minutes, monitoring everything, listening, when he heard the back door of the shop. Not the main bay doors. The back door, off the alley. That door was locked. He'd locked it himself at 7. He went very still. The engine idled. He reached over and shut it off, which was not what he'd planned to do for another 12 minutes of the run, but which made the shop quiet enough to hear. A sound. Metal. Something against the back wall. He came out of the driver's seat and picked up the 18-inch breaker bar from his workbench, not a dramatic choice, just what was closest, and moved toward the back of the shop. He went around the parts shelving and past the compressor and stopped. The back door was open. The hasp had been cut. He stood in the doorway and looked into the alley. Empty, as far as he could see, which was not very far in the dark. He went back inside, phone in hand, and walked the shop perimeter quickly. Bay 1, clear. Bay 3, clear. His office, and here he stopped. His office had been searched. Not ransacked, not the violent disorder of someone who doesn't care about being noticed. Searched carefully, which was more disturbing. Papers moved and replaced inexactly. The desk drawers closed, but not in the order he kept them. The filing cabinet, which had a standard lock that a competent person could open in under a minute, was closed, but the papers inside were not in the order he'd left them. He stood in the middle of his office and turned around slowly. The framed crayon drawing was still on the wall. He looked at it for a second and then looked away. He called Victoria. She answered on the first ring, which meant she was still awake, which at 9 on a Wednesday told him something about how she'd been sleeping lately. "Someone was in my shop," he said. "Back door," Cut hasp. Office searched. Professional. Careful, not destructive. Are you alone? Yes. Don't touch anything else. I'm calling the police and I'm calling Helen and I'm coming there. Victoria, you don't need to. I'm coming. She hung up. He stood in the office doorway and waited. The police arrived first, 2 officers from Millbrook PD who were courteous and efficient and who took photographs and a statement and who, when he told them about the broader context, exchanged a glance that communicated they understood this was above the level of a standard break-in, but were uncertain about the jurisdiction implications. Victoria arrived 45 minutes after the call, which meant she'd driven fast. She was in the same clothes she'd been wearing when he'd called. She hadn't been home yet. She walked in, assessed the situation with a single rapid look, spoke briefly with the officers, and then stood in the office doorway beside Ethan. What were they looking for? She said quietly. My files, Ethan said. The Harlan Voss documentation. I told Helen I had 2 boxes in a Connecticut storage unit. We went there on a Saturday and reviewed them. I should have moved them after that. Would they have found anything useful? No, I had copies made when I gave Helen the originals. The storage unit is empty now. He paused. But whoever did this didn't know that. Victoria absorbed this. Cross is looking for something he thinks is in your possession, something he doesn't want us to have, or something he wants to know if we have. She looked at him steadily. There's a difference between those 2 things. Yes, he said. If he's looking for something specific, it means there's a specific piece of documentation he's afraid of. He paused. Something beyond the transaction records from the Meridian archive. She was quiet for a moment. My father kept records, she said slowly. Personal records. He was meticulous. When he died, I had his papers archived. His personal documents, correspondence, notes, financial records going back 30 years. Where are they? In a document storage facility outside Providence. I haven't gone through them fully. There's a lot. She stopped. When someone you love dies and they were complicated, you don't always go through everything immediately. Ethan looked at her. If your father wrote about what he knew, what he wrote in the letter, but in more detail, with names and specifics, it would be in those records. She met his eyes. Yes, she said. It would be. Cross searched my shop looking for documents, but the documents that could actually hurt him are in Providence, she said, in a facility that only I have access to. She already had her phone out. Helen called at midnight after Victoria had made several calls of her own. They sat in Ethan's office. He'd cleared space on the visitor's chair for her and was sitting on the edge of his desk, while Helen's voice came through the phone on speaker. The storage facility outside Providence confirmed the account is intact and hasn't been accessed by anyone but the registered holder, Helen said. That's good. We should transfer the most sensitive materials to secure legal custody tomorrow, but they're safe tonight. Can we get into the facility tonight? Victoria asked. I don't recommend it. Late-night access creates a record and advertises urgency. Tomorrow, normal business hours, no flags. A pause. Victoria, we need to discuss something. The break-in at Mr. Mercer's shop is a criminal matter, but what it tells us is that Cross has moved to illegal methods. That's significant. It's also potentially useful. Because it's evidence, Ethan said. Because it's a mistake, Helen said. A careful man authorized something that leaves a footprint. He was scared enough to move fast, that's worth noting. After the call, the police finished their report and left, and the shop was quiet again. Victoria sat in the plastic chair across from Ethan's desk. The same chair she'd sat in on the first day, the day she'd come with the photograph of the Mustang and a figure that had seemed too large and turned out not to be. She looked at the crayon drawing on the wall. How old? She asked. She made it when she was 4. She's 7 now. What did she draw? A car. She labeled it Dad's Shop. He looked at the drawing. The car has 8 wheels. She was unclear on the specifics at that point. Victoria almost smiled. Is she safe? Right now? She's at a friend's place, not connected to me in any way Cross would have mapped. He paused. She's fine. Good. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about the gala, she said. It's in 2.5 weeks. Yes, the board session is Friday. Whatever happens there, the gala is still happening. My father's board voted that before any of this started, it's not crosses to cancel. She paused. The car needs to be there. It will be, Ethan said. Not running in a shop. There. She met his eyes. Driving, road ready, through the gates of the venue, in front of 400 people. He'd known this was coming, not running in a garage for a board presentation. Running, actually running, on the road, the way it was built to run. Victoria, there's additional work between running in a controlled environment and being road ready. I know, you have 2.5 weeks. I need to test it on the road properly. Check the brakes under real load, check the suspension geometry, do a second and third tuning pass. I need to find what's wrong that I don't know is wrong yet, because there's always something. Can you do it? He thought about what was done and what remained. The brake system needed road testing. The suspension alignment needed a proper 4-wheel alignment setup, which he'd have to take it to a specialist for. The carburation needed additional tuning at operating temperature under load. The cooling system needed verification at highway speed. There was also the registration. A 1967 vehicle required a title, valid registration, insurance. He hadn't handled any of that. I'll need the title and registration taken care of, he said. That's a legal process I can't do myself. Helen handles that tomorrow. And I'll need a quiet stretch of road for first test drive. Not a highway, not traffic. A place where if something goes wrong, it goes wrong safely. I know a road, she said immediately, which told him she'd already thought about this. My family has a property in Litchfield County, 12 miles of private road, mostly flat, used for agricultural access. We can do the first runs there. He nodded. Saturday, if the weather holds. Saturday, she agreed. She left at 1:30 in the morning. Ethan stayed another half hour, not doing anything useful, just being in the shop. He stood in Bay 2 and looked at the Mustang. The engine had run tonight. For the first time in 40 years, that engine had run. And somebody had broken into his shop and searched his office looking for something they were afraid of. And Damian Cross was sitting somewhere in a city making decisions from a place of fear. And somewhere in a storage facility outside Providence, there were papers that a dead man had written. All of it was converging. Ethan reached into the car and adjusted the side mirror, which had gotten bumped in the earlier work. He looked at his own reflection in the mirror for a second. Tired face, shadow along the jaw, eyes that had something unfamiliar in them. Not the flat look of someone managing. Something else. Something that had come back. He turned the light off in Bay 2 and went home. Saturday came gray and cold and dry, which was the best he could ask for at this time of year. He trailered the Mustang to Litchfield County in the early morning, 2 hours, Victoria meeting him at the gate to the property, a dirt access road winding through fields that were brown with late autumn. She was in the same wool coat as the storage unit, the day they'd found the letter. He noticed she wore that coat when things mattered. He took the car off the trailer and drove it onto the road, and for the first 50 yards he went slowly, feeling everything, hands light on the wheel, listening. The suspension moved over the uneven surface, and he noted each response. A slight vagueness in the front right that told him the alignment was off there. A small pull to the left that confirmed it. Nothing structural. Something adjustable. At 300 yards, he came to a straight stretch and put it in second gear and pressed the accelerator. The engine's sound changed immediately, from the idle's low breathing to something fuller, the 390 responding to load with the particular authority of a large displacement engine that's been properly rebuilt. The acceleration was not violent, it was, there was no other word, purposeful. The car moved like something that had been waiting to move. Victoria was standing at the start of the straight stretch. He passed her at about 40 miles an hour and watched her in the mirror. She was watching the car go. Her hands were at her sides and her hair was moving in the draft. He brought it back. "Well?" she said. "Alignment is off, front right, fixable, straightforward. Everything else..." He stopped. "Everything else is right." She looked at the car beside them, idling in the dirt road with its green paint against the brown fields and gray sky. "How does it drive?" He thought about how to answer that. "Like it knows what it is," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Something passed across her face that he couldn't name. Then she said, "Can I drive it?" He hadn't expected that. He thought about the alignment, the tuning, the list of things still not complete. He thought about the fact that nobody had driven this car in 40 years, and that the first person to properly drive it should probably be a mechanic with a diagnostic ear, not, "Yes," he said. She got in without hesitation, the way she did most things. She adjusted the seat and the mirror. She put her hands on the wheel, and Ethan watched her hands settle there and thought about her father standing beside this car in a photograph that she'd seen when she was 9 years old. She drove it down the straight stretch slowly at first, and then not slowly. He watched the car move away from him down the dirt road, the engine sound rising and falling, the green getting smaller against the empty fields. She brought it back at a speed that was faster than he would have recommended, and which he understood completely. She got out. Her face had color in it, and her expression was the most uncalculated thing he'd seen from her. "He was right," she said. "About what?" "It sounds like breathing." She looked at the car. "You can hear it breathing." They stood there for a moment in the cold Litchfield County morning with the Mustang idling between them, and the sound of the engine moved across the empty fields and came back, and it was exactly what her father had said it was. They drove back to Millbrook separately. Ethan in the truck with the trailer, the Mustang loaded and secured, Victoria in her car behind him most of the way before peeling off toward Hartford. The drive was 2 hours, and Ethan spent most of it thinking about the alignment pull and the secondary tuning work and making a mental list of what the next 10 days needed to look like. This was how he managed things that were too large to hold whole. He broke them into components, addressed each component, didn't look at the full picture until he had to. The alignment appointment was Monday morning at a specialty shop in Waterbury that he'd used before, run by a man named Teo, who'd done alignment work on vintage vehicles long enough to understand that you weren't trying to make them drive like modern cars. You were trying to make them drive like themselves, correctly. Ethan trailered the Mustang down at 7, watched Teo work, took notes, and had the car back in the shop by noon with the front right corrected and a small camber adjustment on the rear that Teo had found and fixed without being asked. He spent the afternoon doing the second tuning pass, engine fully at operating temperature, monitoring the air-fuel mixture with his exhaust gas analyzer, adjusting the carburetor until the numbers settled where they belonged. He found that the engine wanted slightly more fuel at cruise than the initial tune had given it, which was normal for a rebuilt carburetor finding its equilibrium, and he gave it what it wanted. The car was running well, running correctly. There was still the list: cooling system verification at sustained speed, final brake test on actual roads, chrome detailing that Ortega had said he'd come back for, the glass cleaning that needed a specialist product he'd ordered and was due Tuesday. But the list was becoming finite. He could see the bottom of it. That was new. The board session was Friday. On Thursday morning, Victoria called at 7:15, which was early even for her. "The session is tomorrow at 2, she said. "I have the documentation package Helen prepared. I have the testimony of 2 board members who've agreed to speak on my behalf. I have the Meridian transaction records." She paused. "Cross filed a counter motion yesterday afternoon alleging breach of fiduciary duty. Helen says it's designed to muddy the water, create delay." Is she worried? Helen doesn't worry. She recalculates. A slight edge of something tired under the words. What she said is that the counter motion is aggressive enough to suggest he feels the ground shifting. Aggressive is better than methodical, from our perspective. Methodical is harder to read. "How are you?" Ethan asked. A short pause. Not a calculating pause. A surprised one, like she hadn't been asked that directly in a while. "I'm managing." That's what I said when Lily asked me if I was sleeping. She was quiet for a second, then, "I'm not sleeping well. I keep thinking about the board members Cross still has. There are 4 I can't read. They're not committed to his motion, but they haven't come to me either. In a close vote, those 4 are everything. What do you need from them that you don't have? A reason that isn't personal loyalty and isn't legal fear. Something that speaks to the company's actual future." She paused. "Cross makes a credible argument that my judgment has been compromised by emotional attachment to my father's legacy. The restoration project is his primary exhibit. He'll say I spent company resources on a personal sentiment." "The restoration was privately funded," Ethan said. "You told me that from the start." "I know, but the framing is about judgment. not the specific dollars, that I'm making decisions based on grief rather than strategy. Another pause. The 4 undecided board members are all financially oriented. They want to see that the company's future is solid, not that I'm a good daughter. Ethan thought about that. When does the session start? 2 o'clock? Why? Where is it? Hartford, the Ashford Industries building. He looked at the Mustang across the shop. I have an idea, he said. It's probably a bad idea. Tell me. The car is road ready, not gala ready, but road ready. I could drive it to Hartford tomorrow morning, have it parked outside the building when the board members arrive. He stopped. Not as a stunt, as evidence. The car exists, it runs. Whatever Cross says about judgment and sentiment, the car is there, it's real, the project was completed, and it took 6 weeks. Silence on her end. He couldn't tell if she was considering it or dismissing it. The narrative he's building, Ethan continued, depends on the project being unfinished or poorly conceived or wasteful. If the car is sitting outside the building, drivable, completed under budget, and ahead of schedule, that narrative has a problem. Under budget, she said. I came in 12% under what you allocated. I kept records. Another silence. You came in under budget. Engineering background, he said. I cost things accurately. She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might be on another call. Then she said, if you drive that car to Hartford, Damian Cross will try to use it. He'll say it's a theatrical gesture. He'll make it about emotion. Let him, Ethan said. Theatrical gestures that are also factually true are hard to argue with. He heard her breath. Not a sigh. Something shorter, like a decision being made. What time can you be there? Noon. Park in the main lot, visible from the lobby entrance. A pause. Ethan, if something goes wrong with the car on the way, I'll fix it, he said, on the highway. I've fixed worse in worse places. She made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh he'd heard from her in a week. I'll have someone meet you in the lot, 12 o'clock. He spent Thursday doing the things on the list that could be finished in a day. The chrome detail work, which he did himself with the correct products and the patience it required. The glass, the specialist cleaning compound had arrived and he applied it to every window, working in small sections. And the haze that had lived in the glass for 40 years lifted, and the visibility through the windshield became something different. Clear. You could see through it without thinking about the glass. He cleaned the interior again. He adjusted the seat to a neutral position. He checked the tire pressures, the new tires he'd mounted 2 weeks ago, and checked them again. At 7 in the evening, with the shop quiet, he stood in front of the Mustang and looked at it. It was done. Not in the final, exhaustive way it would be for a concours show. There was still detailed work he'd do before the gala. But as a car, as a machine, as a thing that existed and functioned and was what it was supposed to be, it was done. The green paint held the shop lights, the chrome was clean, the glass was clear. The engine, when he'd started it that afternoon for verification, had settled into its idle in under 30 seconds and sat there breathing steadily. Everything right. He took out his phone and called Lily. Dad? She answered immediately, like she'd been waiting. Marcus's kids are really loud. Are they being mean? No, just loud. It's different from our house. A pause. Is the car done? Yes, he said. Does it run? Yes. I knew it, she said. Matter of fact, no drama, just the satisfaction of something she'd been confident about coming true. When can I see it? There's a gala next week, a party where I'm driving it. After that, I want to see it run, she said, not just parked. I'll take you for a drive, he said. After the gala, I promise. Okay. A pause. Dad, are you being safe? He paused. I'm being careful. Is that the same? It's close enough, he said. She accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who understood that some answers were as good as they were going to get. Good night. Good night, Lily. He got to the shop at 5:30 Friday morning, not because there was work to do, there wasn't, not really, but because he wanted time with the car before the drive, the way you want time with something significant before it goes into the world. He made coffee on the ancient Mr. Coffee machine and sat in the office with the bay door open so he could see the car. And he drank it in the particular way you drink coffee when you're not thinking about the coffee. At 9, he drove the Mustang out of the shop for the first time on public roads. The drive from Millbrook to the Ashford Industries building in Hartford was 43 miles. He took Route 44 East, which was mostly two-lane highway with light morning traffic. And he stayed in the right lane and drove at a pace that let him hear everything the car was telling him. Nothing alarming. The suspension behaved well on the road surface. The brakes had progressive, reassuring feel. The engine temperature held in the middle of the gauge after warm-up and stayed there. At one point, on a clear, straight stretch of 44, he pressed the accelerator to about 2/3 and felt the car surge forward with the particular authority of a heavy engine with torque to spare. And the sound filled the cabin and the road opened ahead of him, and for about 10 seconds he wasn't thinking about the board session or Damian Cross or the lawsuit or any of it. He was just driving a 1967 Mustang Fastback that he had brought back from the dead, and it was running, and it was right. Then he eased off and went back to the right lane and kept going. He pulled into the Ashford Industries parking lot at 11:53. The building was a 12-story glass and concrete structure in Hartford's financial district, the kind of building that communicated solidity and institutional weight without being flashy about it. The main lot was visible from the lobby entrance, as Victoria had described. A young man in a dark jacket was waiting near the entrance. He saw the Mustang pull in and walked over. "Mr. Mercer?" "I'm David. I work with Miss Ashford's office. She asked me to make sure you had everything you needed." "I'm fine," Ethan said. "I just need to park where it's visible." David looked at the car with the involuntary attention people give to something that earns it. "That's—" He stopped. "It's very green." "It is," Ethan agreed. He parked it in the center of the lot, nose toward the lobby entrance, and cut the engine. He got out and stood beside it for a moment, checking everything with his eyes one last time. Then he went and found a bench near the lobby entrance and sat down and waited. Board members and their assistants began arriving at 12:30. He watched them from the bench, not obviously, just present. Most of them walked through the lot without stopping. 2 paused and looked at the car. One, an older man in a dark coat who stopped dead for a moment, just looking, before continuing inside. One, a woman in her 50s who pulled out her phone and took a picture of it before she seemed to realize she was doing it. At 12:45, a car he recognized, the dark blue Audi that Philip Crane drove, pulled into the lot and parked on the far side. Crane got out, and with him was a man Ethan had never seen in person, but recognized from the photographs Victoria had shown him. Damian Cross was 53 years old, heavier than his photographs suggested, with the particular kind of well-maintained appearance that comes from spending money on it consistently. He wore a suit that was correct in every detail, and a tie that was a slightly different shade than his jacket, in a way that was either deliberate or a rare moment of imprecision. He walked through the lot with the forward-leaning posture of someone who moves toward things rather than waiting for them to arrive. He saw the Mustang immediately. He stopped. His eyes went from the car to Ethan on the bench. It took him only a second to make that connection. And his face did something that Ethan couldn't read precisely. Not anger, not surprise. Something more controlled than either, which was almost more unsettling. He walked toward Ethan. Crane moved to follow him, and Cross held up a hand without looking back. Crane stopped. Cross came to stand a few feet from Ethan's bench. He looked at the car for a moment, then at Ethan. "Mr. Mercer," he said. His voice was measured, deeper than it had been on the phone, the voice of someone who had practiced managing rooms with it. "Mr. Cross," Ethan said. He stayed seated. Cross looked at the car again. "It's finished. Yes. It runs. Drove it here from Millbrook this morning." Cross was quiet for a moment. There was something in his face that he was working to keep absent. "You're here because she asked you to be." "I'm here because the car is here," Ethan said. "It's going to a memorial gala next week. This seemed like a reasonable route. Through our parking lot. It's a big lot." Cross looked at him with the expression of a man deciding how direct to be. He apparently decided on fairly direct. "What is it you're hoping to accomplish, Mr. Mercer?" "The lawsuit against Stapp is filed. The Meridian records are in Helen Marsh's possession. The board meeting is in an hour." He paused. "You've played your hand." I'm a mechanic, Ethan said. I don't play hands. I fix things. And what is it you fixed exactly? Ethan looked at the car. A car that hadn't run in 40 years. He looked back at Cross. That's not nothing. Cross studied him for a moment. The accusation against you was unfortunate, he said, and the word unfortunate landed with the precision of someone who had chosen it very carefully. What Hollis did was outside the scope of anything I authorized or was aware of at the time. My acquisition of Meridian was a business transaction. I didn't ask you anything, Ethan said. Cross stopped. You came over here and started talking, Ethan continued. I was sitting here. He kept his voice level, no heat in it. If you have something to say to me that's legal in nature, say it to Helen Marsh. If you have something to say to me personally, I'm not particularly interested. A long moment passed. Cross looked at him with the expression of someone recalculating, and then he looked at the Mustang one more time, and something moved across his face that Ethan couldn't name, but that he thought might have been something close to discomfort. Have a pleasant afternoon, Cross said. He walked into the building. Crane followed without looking at Ethan. Ethan sat on the bench for a while longer. His hands were steady. He was somewhat surprised they were steady. His phone buzzed. Victoria. He just walked past me in the lobby. His face was wrong. What happened? Ethan typed back. Nothing dramatic. He came over to talk. I didn't say much. A pause. Then, that's what scared him. The board session lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes, which Ethan knew because he stayed in the parking lot. He moved from the bench to the car after the first hour, sat in the driver's seat with the window down and the car silent around him. Around 2:30 he got hungry and ate a sandwich he'd brought from home, sitting in the driver's seat of a 1967 Mustang in a Hartford parking lot, which was not how he'd imagined this part of the day. At 4:26, Victoria texted him, "Coming down." She came through the lobby doors 4 minutes later with Helen beside her, Helen talking and Victoria listening with her head slightly down in the way she did when she was processing. They came across the lot and Helen peeled off toward her own car. And Victoria came to the Mustang and stood at the driver's window. Ethan read her face. He'd gotten better at reading her face in the past 6 weeks. "Tell me," he said. "The counter-motion failed," she said. 11-7. She said it without the release of tension he'd expected. Her voice was flat, controlled, holding something in. "The emergency session motion failed with it. Cross doesn't have the votes to call another session without a significant shift in the board composition, which he can't achieve without acquiring more shares, which the filing of the lawsuit makes significantly harder to do without scrutiny." "That's a win," Ethan said. "Yes." She looked at the car. "He also—" She stopped. Started again. One of the 4 undecided board members voted against Cross. When Helen asked him afterward why he'd changed his position, he said, "Another stop." Her jaw was tight. He said he'd seen the car in the parking lot when he arrived, that he'd looked it up, the original, photographs of what it looked like when it was found, and that whatever you could say about the judgment involved in the project, a car that had been sitting for 40 years was now running, and someone had driven it here from Millbrook this morning, and that suggested a certain quality of execution that he found relevant to the larger question. Ethan was quiet. He made his decision partly based on a car, she said. There was something in her voice that was either disbelief or something more complicated. People make decisions for all kinds of reasons, Ethan said. I know. She looked at him. It helped. It actually helped. She shook her head slightly, not dismissing it, just absorbing it. Then, it's not over. Cross will regroup. He has money and patience and he doesn't lose gracefully, but today was significant. Okay, he said. She looked at the car for a moment. Then she said, I went through some of my father's personal files last night, from the Providence archive. She'd been waiting to say this. He could tell from how she held it. There's a folder. Correspondence from the period of the Harlan Voss accusation. He wrote, he kept carbons of letters he sent and received. He was meticulous that way. He wrote to Warren Hollis 3 times over the period of the accusation, asking him to reconsider, asking him to let the investigation produce an honest result. Ethan went still. Hollis wrote back twice, she said. The letters are specific. They make clear that Hollis understood my father knew the accusation was manufactured. They make clear that Hollis believed he had sufficient leverage over my father through the Meridian investment to ensure his silence. She paused. And in my father's third letter, the last one he sent, he writes that he's withdrawing his objection and that he'll accept the situation and that he wants the matter closed. She stopped. He signed it. He had it sent. And then he parked the car. The parking lot was quiet. A car passed on the street outside the lot. Somewhere inside the building, a door closed. Victoria, Ethan said carefully. He tried, she said. That's what I need you to understand. He tried 3 times, and then he stopped. And I've been angry at him since I found the letter, and I'm still angry. But he tried first. She was looking at the Mustang's hood. The letters give us something Helen didn't have. They establish that Hollis knew the accusation was false and used it deliberately, and they establish that he coerced my father into silence. That's the chain of knowledge, documented, with dates. She looked up. Helen says it significantly strengthens the civil case against Stapp. And against Cross? If we can establish Cross had access to those letters when he acquired Meridian, and Helen thinks we can, then his claim that he was unaware of Hollis's conduct becomes substantially harder to sustain. She paused. This is good, Ethan. This is the piece that was missing. He should have felt relief. He did feel it partly, but underneath it was something else. The image of a man writing 3 letters, failing, and then parking a car and building a debt inside it that he carried for the rest of his life. That was a specific kind of weight. He was trying to repay something he couldn't find a way to repay, Ethan said. Yes, she said quietly, and the car was the only place he could put it. She paused. Yes, I think so. They stayed with that for a moment. Drive me somewhere, she said. He looked at her. Where? Anywhere. I've been in that building for 4 hours and I need... She gestured at the parking lot, the building, the whole day. Somewhere that isn't this. He reached across and opened the passenger door from inside. She got in and she adjusted the seat the way she had on the Litchfield Road, not asking permission, just doing it. And he started the engine, and the 390 came to life around them. He drove north out of Hartford on Route 44, the same road he'd come in on, and neither of them said anything for a while. The engine's sound was different with 2 people in the car. It felt fuller, the way rooms feel different when they are occupied. The afternoon light was going toward 5 o'clock, and the highway opened ahead of them, and the car moved through it with the particular ease of a machine doing exactly what it was built to do. After maybe 10 miles, Victoria said, "What are you going to do after this is over?" "Go back to the shop," Ethan said. "There's a Chevelle waiting on a brake job. Ray has been managing it, and I've got 3 other inquiries I've been slow on because of this project." "And the restoration work? The larger projects?" "I enjoy it," he said. "I've always enjoyed it. The shop pays the bills, but the restoration work is..." He thought about how to say it. "It's engineering. The same thing I trained for, just with different parameters." She was quiet for a moment. "When this is over, the legal process, the gala, I'd like to help you rebuild the public record, the engineering credentials, the correct account of what happened 15 years ago. Not a PR exercise, but making sure the documentation exists, that someone can look you up and find the truth of it." "Virtual?" He thought about that. "I appreciate it. I know you do. I'm telling you so you know it's going to happen, not asking your permission." She glanced at him. "You have a right to your reputation. What was taken from you was real. The work of fixing it is real too." He kept his eyes on the road. The sky ahead of them was doing something interesting. The late afternoon light catching the cloud cover and turning the horizon a color that wasn't quite anything, gold moving into gray. "What do you want?" he asked. "After. What does Victoria Ashford want?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, "I want to run the company well." "That's real. It's not just what I'm supposed to want, it's what I actually want. My father built something worth building." She paused. I want to be able to visit his grave and not feel like I still have something to prove to him. Another pause. And I want to sleep again. I miss sleeping. He almost smiled. So do I. They drove for another few miles, and then he turned around at a quiet pullout and drove back toward Hartford, and the car moved through the early evening traffic with the composed solidity of something that knew where it was going. He dropped her at the Ashford building where her car was still parked, and she got out and stood at the window. 1 week until the gala, she said. I know. Is there anything else the car needs that I should know about? I want one more road test, full load, extended run, confirm the cooling system at temperature, and Ortega is coming back Tuesday for the final chrome and glass detail. He paused. After Tuesday, it's ready. Good. She held his gaze for a moment. Thank you, Ethan. For the car. For today. A pause. For all of it. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said the simple version of what was true. It's a good car. She nodded once, and she walked back to her car, and he pulled out of the lot and pointed the Mustang west toward Millbrook. It was 9 o'clock on Sunday night, 5 days before the gala, when Ethan got the call from the alarm company. His shop had triggered a motion sensor. He was at home. He threw on clothes and drove the 8 minutes from his house to the shop in 6. And when he pulled into the parking lot, the bay doors were closed and everything looked right from outside, and the alarm was off. It had silenced itself on the timer, which was how it worked. He called the alarm company back and confirmed the trigger. Sensor 12, which was the interior of Bay 2. He unlocked the side door and went in. Bay 2. He turned on the lights. The Mustang was there. That was the first thing. It was there. It hadn't been taken. The second thing was the hood, which was open. He'd left it closed. He approached carefully, the way you approach something you're not sure about, and looked into the engine compartment. At first he didn't see it. The engine looked right. Everything looked right. Then he smelled it. Brake fluid. Not a trace. A smell, specific and chemical, coming from underneath the car rather than the engine. He crouched beside the driver's front wheel and put his hand under the car and found the brake line before he saw it. The main line from the master cylinder to the front distribution block. It was wet. He followed it with his fingers and found the place where wet became a drip. It had been cut. Not severed. That would have been obvious on inspection. Scored. A precise cut through most of the line's wall, leaving enough material to look intact on a casual inspection, but failing under pressure. At highway speed, under full brake load, the line would blow. He sat on the floor of Bay 2 with his back against the car's front bumper and his hands in his lap, and he looked at the ceiling for a moment. Someone had been in his shop again. Someone had waited for the alignment and the mechanical work to be done and the car to be road ready, and had come in the window of time between Sunday afternoon and 9 p.m. and done something that wouldn't kill the car in the parking lot, but would kill it, or the driver, on the road. He called Victoria at 9:22. She answered on the first ring. He heard her breath change when he told her. Not a dramatic sound. A sharp, slight intake, contained immediately. Are you safe? She said. Yes, I'm in the shop. Is the car drivable? Not until I fix the line. The cut is in a location that would pass visual inspection at normal distance. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. He paused. This isn't somebody's assistant. This is someone who knows brake systems. I'm calling the police, she said. And Helen. And... She stopped. Ethan. I'm going to have Cross's office contacted tonight. Through legal channels. Making clear that we have the car on surveillance. We don't have surveillance. I know. But he doesn't know what we have and what we don't. A pause. Was the car damaged anywhere else? I haven't fully checked. The brake line is what I found. I'll go through everything. Do that. And then call me back regardless of the time. He spent the next hour going over the car systematically. Every fluid line, every electrical connection he could access, every component that could be interfered with invisibly. He found nothing else. The brake line was the only intervention, but targeted, precise, designed to do its damage away from the shop. The police arrived at 10:30. He showed them the line, which the officer photographed and documented. They were more engaged this time than they'd been at the break-in. A tampered brake line on a vehicle was in a different category than a searched office. They took it seriously. Helen called at 11. She was precise and unsurprised in the way lawyers sometimes are when they've been waiting for a situation to escalate to a specific point. "This is good. In a terrible way," she said. "A tampered brake line in the context of an active civil suit and a documented prior break-in creates a pattern. We're going to make sure the pattern is well documented." "And Cross?" Ethan asked. "Cannot be directly connected tonight, but we're building the file." A pause. "Can the car be repaired before the gala?" "Yes," Ethan said. He was already thinking about it, the way he always started thinking about what needed to be done before he was done being angry about why it needed to be done. "It's a brake line. I have replacement material in the shop. A few hours of work, done correctly. Tomorrow morning? I'll start tonight." After Helen, he called Victoria back. "Fix it," she said. Before he could say anything, "I'm going to." "I know. I'm saying it out loud." She was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know that what was done to your car tonight and what was done to you 15 years ago, they're the same impulse, the same type of person. The belief that if you can damage something enough, quietly enough, people won't notice what caused the damage." A pause. "They're wrong about that. They were wrong 15 years ago, and they're wrong now." Ethan looked at the Mustang and the work lights. The hood was still open from the police documentation. The engine was visible, complete and correct. Everything Pete Garvey had welded and everything Ethan had rebuilt sitting there solid. "I know," he said, "and the gala is in 5 days and the car is going to be there." "Yes," he said. "Good." A pause, quieter. "I'm sorry this happened." "Stop apologizing," he said. "I knew what I was agreeing to. You told me it would get complicated." "I did." "So stop apologizing and let me fix the brake line." A short silence. Then, and he heard it clearly this time, no almost about it, she laughed. A real one, brief and tired and genuine. "Okay," she said. "Go fix it." He worked until 2 in the morning. The repair required cutting out the scored section and fitting a new steel line, double flaring the ends, fitting new fittings, and bleeding the system fully to verify there was no air in the circuit. He did it methodically, with the care he brought to every brake system, because brake systems were things you did not shortcut. At 1:15, he took a break and sat on the stool by his workbench and drank cold coffee and looked at the car and thought about what it had been through. Sitting 40 years in Hartford. 3 mechanics who walked away. Being taken apart, every component addressed. A block that went to Vermont and came back fixed. Paint that took 9 days. A board session in a parking lot. A brake line that someone wanted to fail at highway speed. And here it was, under the lights in Millbrook, running. He finished the brake line at 1:55 and bled the system and verified the pressure at the caliper, and did it a second time because that was the correct protocol for brake systems on vehicles that people would be riding in. He stood beside the car at 2 in the morning with his hands clean and looked at it. 5 days to the gala. He turned off the work lights. He locked the door. He drove home through Millbrook's empty streets, and when he got home he didn't sit up thinking. He set an alarm for 6, and he lay down, and he slept. In the morning he called Ray and told him what had happened. Ray was quiet through the account, and when Ethan finished, Ray said, "They're afraid of that car." "They're afraid of what it represents," Ethan said. "Same thing," Ray said. "You need anything from me today? Come in. We're doing final prep. 4 days. I'll be there at 7. At 7:15, Ray arrived with 2 coffees and a bag of something from the diner on Main Street, and they worked side by side through the morning. The car received everything it still needed. Ortega came on Tuesday as planned, did the final chrome and glass detail with the focused intensity he brought to all finish work, looked at his own work for a long time afterward, said nothing, and left. By Wednesday, there was nothing left to do but wait. Ethan drove the car one final time Thursday morning. Not the Litchfield Road, not Hartford, just Millbrook. Down Millfield Road and through the center of town and out on Route 7 for a few miles and back. The car was quiet in the way that something working correctly is quiet. No drama, no strain, everything doing what it was designed to do. The brake pedal was firm under his foot. The engine held temperature. The alignment tracked true. He pulled back into the lot and parked it and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before getting out. He put his hands on the wheel one last time and sat with the car the way he had on the first day in the storage unit, when it had been someone else's silent thing covered in dust. Now it was something else. Now it breathed. Lily called that afternoon. "Tomorrow?" she said. "Tomorrow night," Ethan confirmed. "The gala is at 7. I'm driving the car there." "Are you nervous?" He thought about the brake line, about Cross in the parking lot, about Gerald Stapp's name in transaction records, about a folded letter with a single initial on the outside that had started all of this. "A little," he said. "It's okay to be nervous," Lily said. "Mrs. Keary says nervous just means you care about something." "Mrs. Keary is usually right." "I know." A pause. "Dad, you fixed it." "Yeah," he said. "I did." "I knew you would," she said. He sat in the car for a while after the call ended, the shop quiet around him, the gala one day away, and he thought that whatever happened tomorrow, whatever came next in the courts and the boardrooms and the slow unspooling of consequences, this was done. The car was done. And it had taken everything he had, and it was right. He got out and locked up and went home, and for the first time in 6 weeks, he did not go back. The morning of the gala, Ethan woke up at 5:15 without an alarm. He lay there for a moment in the dark of his bedroom, listening to the house. It was quiet in the specific way it had been quiet for 6 weeks. Lily's absence had a shape, a particular kind of silence that lived in the rooms she wasn't in. He'd gotten used to it, the way you get used to things you don't want to get used to. Tomorrow she'd be home. He'd held that thought the way you hold something small and solid in your pocket when everything else is uncertain. He got up, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The street outside was dark and still, November making itself known in the bare trees and the frosted cars at the curb. He thought about the gala, which started at 7. He thought about the drive, 40 minutes from Millbrook to the Whitmore Estate in Farmington, where the event was being held, a venue that had hosted Ashford Industries events for 2 decades, and whose grounds were large enough to stage a car arrival properly. He thought about the brake line, which he had fixed and verified twice, and which he would verify one more time before he left the shop this afternoon. He thought about Damian Cross, who had not been publicly quiet in the 5 days since the board session. Cross's communications firm had released a statement 2 days ago describing the civil lawsuit as retaliatory and without merit, and 2 business press outlets had run pieces with unnamed sources characterizing Victoria's leadership as emotionally driven. Helen had responded through Ashford Industries' own communications team with a statement of 8 carefully chosen sentences. And then she had gone back to building the legal case, because Helen understood that the real argument was not happening in the press. Ethan drank his coffee and thought about all of this, and then put it aside. Because today the car needed to run, and that was what he could control. He was at the shop by 6:30. Ray was already there. Of course, Ray was already there. Ray had probably been there since 6, because Ray had strong opinions about being present for significant moments, even when he expressed those opinions through the simple act of showing up quietly rather than making any announcement about it. He had the bay lights on and a fresh pot of coffee made, and he was wiping down the Mustang's exterior with a microfiber cloth, working in small sections, not because the car needed it. Ortega had detailed it to a standard that didn't require improvement, but because it was the thing to do. Ethan stood in the bay doorway and looked at the 2 of them, his employee and his car. "Morning," Ray said without looking up. "Morning." Ray finished the section he was on and stepped back. The car looked like itself, the way it had been looking all week, the green holding the light in that complex, shifting way. "She's ready," he said. "I'm going to check the brake line one more time." Ray nodded like this was completely reasonable and not the 3rd verification. "I'll check the fluids while you're under there." They worked for an hour, the 2 of them, in the comfortable silence of people who know their work. Ethan found nothing wrong with the brake line, which he had expected and still needed to confirm. Ray found the coolant level had dropped a marginal amount since Wednesday. Within spec, nothing alarming, but he topped it without being asked. The oil was right, the tires were right. At 8 o'clock, Ethan started the engine for the last time in the shop. It caught on the first rotation and settled into its idle in under 20 seconds, and the sound filled the bay the way it always did, chest deep, deliberate, the particular signature of this engine in this car, which he would have recognized now among 100 others. He let it run for 15 minutes, monitoring everything. Temperature came up and held. Oil pressure steady. No sounds that didn't belong. He shut it off. "All right," he said, to himself or to Ray, or to the car. He wasn't entirely sure which. "All right," Ray agreed. At 9:30, Victoria's number came up on his phone. "How is it?" she said before he could say anything. "Ready." He heard her exhale, not dramatically, just a breath going out. "Helen spoke to the venue this morning. They've cleared the main approach for the arrival. There are photographers, press, and the family's own documentation team." A pause. "I want you to know that the arrival is going to be—" "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about it. Are you okay with that?" He thought about it. Being photographed in a Mustang that had been cut from dead metal and brought back was not the hardest thing he'd done in 6 weeks. "Yes," he said. "There's something else." She said it in the specific way she said things she'd been holding, not reluctantly, but carefully. "I spoke to the gala's program director yesterday. With the documentation we have from the Providence archive and Helen's current filing, there's going to be a public statement made tonight. Not the full legal case, but enough. About what happened 15 years ago, and about the restoration, and about what my father asked for in the letter." She paused. "About you. Your name, cleared publicly. Not just in a court document." Ethan was quiet. "I wanted to ask you before I confirmed it," she said. "It's your name. You should decide." He stood in the bay with the car 6 feet away and the morning light coming through the open door, and he thought about what it meant. His name said in front of 400 people in a way that meant the opposite of how it had been said 15 years ago. He thought about being 20 years old in a conference room while men who knew the truth said inconclusive. He thought about 12 years of building something smaller because smaller was what he could figure out how to do. "Yes," he said. "Do it." A short silence. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "It's my name." She almost laughed, the same way she'd almost laughed a dozen times over 6 weeks, always surprised by it, always brief. 7 o'clock, she said. "I'll see you there." The hours between the call and the afternoon moved strangely, the way time moves when you're waiting for something that has weight. Ethan went home, showered, found the dark jacket he wore for anything that required a dark jacket, and determined that it still fit and wasn't obviously wrong. He ate lunch standing at the kitchen counter. He called Dana. "Today's the day," Dana said. "Today's the day." "How are you actually doing?" He sat down at the kitchen table. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've been thinking about the car so long that now the car is done, and I don't entirely know what to do with the rest of it. The rest of it being 15 years of being wronged. More or less." Dana was quiet for a moment. "Ethan, when you sold the engineering equipment, when you took the loan for the shop, when you showed up in Millbrook with Lily in a car seat and started over," she stopped. "You didn't talk about what happened. Not really. You just moved. Moving was easier." "I know, but moving doesn't mean it's gone." Another pause. "Tonight isn't the end of something. It's just the first time you're allowed to stop moving." He sat with that for a while. "Lily? Right here, driving me crazy in the best way. She wants to know what color dress you think she should wear to see the car tomorrow. Tell her she can wear whatever she wants. Tell her the car doesn't care about dress colors." He heard Lily in the background. "The car cares. Cars have opinions about things." He closed his eyes for a second. "I'll see you tomorrow," he told Dana. He got to the shop at 3, verified the brake line for the 4th and final time, checked every fluid, checked the tire pressures, walked around the car twice, and looked at everything. He found a small smudge on the passenger window from the morning's work and cleaned it. He found nothing wrong with anything that mattered. He put on the dark jacket. He looked at himself in the reflection of the driver's window, which was not a mirror, but was good enough. He looked like a mechanic in a dark jacket, which was accurate. He opened the bay door at 4:15. The afternoon was cold and the sky was the flat gray of November, doing what November does. And the green of the Mustang against that sky was something almost impossible. He drove out of the shop and turned right on Millfield Road, heading toward Route 44 and then south and west toward Farmington. The drive was 43 minutes. He took it at a steady, unhurried pace, the car moving through the Connecticut evening with the ease it had found over 5 weeks and 100 careful miles. He kept the radio off. The engine's sound was company enough, that specific breathing quality that James Ashford had described to his daughter and that Ethan had verified was real. He thought about James Ashford, who he'd never met and never would. A man who'd built something worth building and then made a choice in a moment of fear that ate the rest of his life from the inside. Who'd written 3 letters that nobody was supposed to see. Who'd locked his regret in a car and preserved it for 40 years as if preservation was the same as repair. And finally, at the end, understood that it wasn't and tried to fix what he could fix while he still could. He was not a villain. He was not a hero. He was a man who'd been afraid and made the wrong choice and spent decades knowing it. There were probably millions of people like that, walking around carrying the weight of one specific moment where they chose wrong. Most of them didn't leave letters. Most of them took it to wherever they went when they left. Ethan thought he understood something about that kind of weight because he'd been carrying his own version of it. Not the guilt of a choice, but the damage of someone else's choice. The way that injury can become something you organize your life around without realizing you've done it. Building smaller, staying quiet, not fighting because the people who'd wronged you had so much more than you did and the math didn't work. The math was different now. The Whitmore Estates gates came into view at 6:48, 2 stone pillars with an iron gate between them, open tonight, with a figure in a dark jacket standing at the entrance, a staff member, young, who raised his hand when he saw the Mustang coming. Ethan slowed and rolled down the window. "Mr. Mercer," the young man said. "Yes." "They're ready for you. If you'd follow the drive around to the left, there's a staging area before the main entrance. Ms. Ashford said to tell you there's no hurry." He followed the drive. The estate grounds were lit in the amber way that event lighting tries to be warm and sometimes actually is. And through the trees he could see the venue building. A renovated carriage house, large, with light coming from its tall windows. Cars were parked in organized rows. He could hear the low sound of a crowd already inside. The staging area was a wide gravel apron at the side of the main building, screened from the entrance approach by a row of hedges. 2 other cars were there, a vintage Mercedes from the 50s that he recognized as another Ashford family vehicle, and a town car. And standing by the far hedge alone was Victoria. She was in a dark green dress, not the same green as the car, a different shade, deeper, more formal. And her hair was up. She looked like someone who had spent 40 minutes getting ready and was trying not to look like it, which was different from her usual mode of not caring how she looked. She cared tonight. That was clear. She watched the Mustang pull into the staging area and park, and she didn't move until the engine was off. Then she walked over. He got out. She looked at the car, and then at him, and her expression was the unguarded one, the one that came out sometimes when she wasn't thinking about managing how she appeared. "You drove it here," she said. "That was the plan." "I know, but you drove it here." She looked at the car one more time. 40 years and 43 miles. She shook her head slightly, not dismissing it, just at the size of it. "How are you?" he asked. "Terrified," she said, which is more honest than managing. Good honest or bad honest? "I don't know yet." She looked toward the venue entrance. "There are 400 people in there, half of them with financial interests in what I say tonight, and I'm about to stand up and tell them that my father did something wrong and then tried to make it right, and that I intend to finish what he started." She paused. "It's the right thing to do. That doesn't make it less frightening." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She turned to look at him directly. "When it's time, the announcement, your name, the clearing of the record, I need you to be in the room, not outside. In the room." "Okay." "You've spent 12 years outside the room, Ethan. Tonight you're in it." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said again, and this time it meant something more than agreement. They went inside. The room was large and warm, with the specific sound of 400 people not yet called to attention. The mixture of voices and movement and the particular acoustics of a high-ceilinged space. Round tables, flowers, the amber light from outside carried indoors. Ethan moved through it with the slight discomfort of someone who didn't spend time in rooms like this, trying not to look like he was calculating exit routes, which he was. He found a position near the side of the room where he could see the small stage at the front. He recognized Helen in the crowd. She gave him a short nod, precise, the nod of someone who has things under control and wants you to know it. He saw board members he recognized from the board session coverage that Victoria had shared. He saw people he didn't know in the specific kind of clothes that mean money, managed quietly. He did not see Damien Cross, which he noticed. At 7:30, a man from the estate introduced the evening. At 7:45, a video tribute to James Ashford played on a screen behind the stage. Archival footage, photographs, a chronology of Ashford Industries. Ethan watched a younger version of the man in the photographs move through decades of footage, building something, growing it. The particular confidence of someone who knows what they're good at. And then the footage reached the gap, the period after the Mustang was parked, the period of the letters and the silence, and Ethan watched the footage skip past it, the way edited lives always skip past the parts that don't fit the tribute, and he thought about what it cost to carry something like that for 35 years. Victoria came to the stage at 8 o'clock. She walked to the podium in the dark green dress with her shoulders straight and her hands at her sides, and the room went quiet with the particular efficiency that important rooms go quiet when the person who matters most is speaking. She looked out at the audience for a moment before she began. "My father was not a perfect man," she said. "I've spent the last 6 weeks understanding that more specifically than I ever have, and I'm going to tell you about it because I think he would have wanted me to, and because some debts don't go away just because the person who owed them is gone." The room was very still. She told it plainly. Not the legal version, not the press version, the human version. A man who'd been afraid. A decision made in a moment of fear that had consequences for someone who'd never done anything wrong. Letters written and a silence kept. A car parked as a placeholder for guilt that had nowhere else to go. She said Ethan's name. She said what had happened 15 years ago. She said it clearly, in front of 400 people, with the precision and the weight that the situation warranted. He stood at the side of the room and heard his name said in public for the first time in 15 years in a way that meant something true. It was a strange feeling. Not triumphant. He'd thought it might feel triumphant, and it didn't. It felt more like something finishing, like a sound that had been going on for a long time in the background finally stopping, and in the stopping you could hear how loud it had been. "Ethan Mercer," Victoria said, "restored my father's car in 6 weeks. He did it knowing the history. He did it when he could have walked away, and he had every reason to walk away." She looked toward where he was standing, and 400 people turned to follow her gaze. "The car is outside. It runs. My father asked me to find this man and make things right. That process has begun. Through our legal team, through the courts, through the public record." She paused. "This evening is the beginning of that, not the end." She stepped back from the podium. The room responded, not the scripted response of a corporate event, but something that moved through it differently. The sound of people who had heard something real and were reacting to it rather than performing a reaction. Ethan stood at the side of the room while people looked at him. He didn't know what to do with his face, so he kept it still. A man near him, one of the board members, the older one who'd stopped in the parking lot in Hartford, caught his eye and gave him a nod that was small and serious and genuine. Helen appeared at his elbow. "She did well," she said quietly. "Yes," Ethan said. "Cross wasn't here tonight. His office confirmed he declined the invitation 6 days ago." She paused. "His lawyers contacted mine this afternoon. Preliminary language suggesting a settlement discussion on the civil suit." She said it in the same tone she said everything. "It's early. Don't read too much into it yet." "But something shifted." "Something shifted," she agreed. "Exposure does that. Careful men don't like being exposed. It changes their calculus." She looked toward the stage. Victoria's statement tonight becomes part of the documented record. Combined with the Providence archive materials and the Meridian transaction records, the civil case has become significantly more difficult for Cross to categorize as frivolous. A brief pause. Gerald Stapp's attorney also reached out this week, separately. What did they want? To discuss cooperation. She looked at him steadily. Stapp knows how this ends if he doesn't cooperate. He was 28 years old when he filed that accusation. He's 43 now. He has a consultancy and a reputation he'd prefer to keep. She let that sit for a moment. He'll give us what we need. Ethan absorbed this. Stapp cooperating. Stapp, who had shared his office for 2 years and borrowed his stapler, who had been doing the unforgivable thing quietly while being completely ordinary. He didn't feel satisfaction at the news. He felt something more tired and more complex, the acknowledgement that the machinery of consequence was finally moving in the right direction, which wasn't the same as feeling good about any of it. At 9:15, they brought the Mustang around to the main entrance. Ethan drove it. He'd asked to drive it himself, and nobody had argued. He came around from the staging area and the gravel crunched under the tires, and then he was on the estate's main approach, the long stone-lined path that led from the gates to the venue entrance. The approach was flanked by low lighting, and there were people on either side. Guests who'd moved outside, staff, photographers. He drove slowly. Not dramatically slowly. Just the pace that felt correct, the pace that gave the car its proper presence without making it a performance. The 390 breathed at low RPM, its sound carrying in the cold November air. And in the amber light, the green paint did what it did, shifting and deepening, alive in the way things are alive when they're doing what they were made to do. He could see Victoria at the end of the approach, standing at the entrance. She was watching the car come toward her, and her expression was the unguarded one again, the one he'd learned to recognize as the most honest version of her face. He pulled up and stopped and cut the engine. The silence after the engine stopped had weight. The crowd that had gathered, people spilling out of the venue, standing along the approach, was quiet in it. Not the rehearsed quiet of a ceremony, the involuntary quiet of a moment that has its own gravity. Ethan got out of the car. Victoria walked to him. She put her hand on the Mustang's roof, the way she'd been doing since the storage unit, and looked at the car for a moment. Then she looked at Ethan. 40 years, she said. 40 years, he said. She held out her hand and he shook it, and it was not the same handshake as the one across his desk 6 weeks ago. That one had been an agreement about a car. This one was something harder to name, an acknowledgement between two people who'd been through something together and had each come out of it changed in ways they hadn't fully mapped yet. A photographer was taking pictures. He could see the flash. He didn't care about that right now. Thank you, she said. You already said that. I know. I'm saying it again. She didn't look away. For fixing what my father couldn't. He thought about that. He thought about James Ashford writing 3 letters and parking a car. He thought about the letter with just the initial on the outside, tucked into the glove compartment, housing where it had lived for years, waiting for someone to reach far enough to find it. He started it, Ethan said. I just finished the work. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read and then nodded, once the way she nodded when something was decided and she was done talking about it. The rest of the evening moved at its own pace. People came to look at the car. Not all of them, but enough. The older board member stood beside it for a while, talking to a woman Ethan didn't recognize, both of them looking at the engine through the open hood that Ray had shown him how to display correctly. A few people asked Ethan questions about the restoration, careful, interested questions, not small talk. And he answered them the way he answered all questions about engine work, which was honestly and with more detail than people usually expected. Helen found him again around 10 o'clock and said quietly that Cross's legal team had formalized the settlement inquiry. It'll be months before anything resolves, she said. I want to be honest with you about that. These things take time. I know, he said, but the direction is right. Yes, he said. The direction is right. He drove the Mustang back to Millbrook at 11 that night. Victoria had arranged for the car to return to the shop and be loaded on the trailer for the gala venue's display the following week. There were logistics, a formal presentation for the company's anniversary documentation, but tonight he drove it home himself because it felt right to drive it home himself. The highway was mostly empty at that hour. He drove in the right lane at a steady pace, the engine doing what it did, the heater doing its best against the November cold, the green paint invisible in the dark. He thought about the evening. He thought about Helen's update and what settlement actually meant. Not exoneration handed down by a moment, but a long process of documentation and legal movement and public record that would take the shape it took over months. He didn't expect a clean ending. He was a mechanic. He knew that when you fix something, you fix it. It doesn't become a different thing. It becomes the repaired version of what it was. The crack in the block was still there under Pete Garvey's weld. The repair in the rear quarter panel was still there under Ortega's paint. You didn't erase the damage. You addressed it correctly, and you moved forward. That was what he understood about restoration that he hadn't fully understood about his own life until 6 weeks ago. You don't get to start over. You get to repair and continue. And sometimes continuing, done right, looks something like starting over from a distance. He got back to Millbrook at midnight. He pulled the Mustang into Bay 2. One last time, the familiar way the tires crossed the threshold, the light changing as the car moved under the fluorescence. And he shut the engine off and sat for a moment in the silence. He'd been sitting in this car in various states for 6 weeks. First in the storage unit, just to feel what was there. Then in the shop, during assembly, checking positions and clearances. Then on the Litchfield Road. Then in Hartford. Then the test drives. Then the gala. He'd spent more time in this car than in most cars he'd ever owned. He put his hands on the wheel one final time and looked at the instrument panel. The gauges that had been at 0 when he first sat here, all of them reading correctly now. Oil pressure, temperature, fuel, the tachometer at idle, everything accounted for. He got out and stood beside the car. He looked at it the way you look at finished work. Not for problems, because the looking for problems phase was done. Just looking, taking in what it was. It was a 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback that had sat for 40 years and had now run for 6 weeks and would keep running for as long as someone maintained it correctly, which was the only guarantee any mechanical thing ever came with. It was the color of something between green and gold depending on the light. It was the car that a man had driven and been proud of, and then stopped because he couldn't bear to look at it. It was the car that had carried a letter that had carried a name that had been buried for 15 years. It was a car. It was just a car. And it was much more than that. The way things accumulate meaning without being asked to. He turned off the work lights and locked the shop and drove home. Lily came home the next morning. Dana brought her at 10 o'clock, Marco driving, and Lily got out of the back seat before the car had fully stopped and came across the front yard at the speed she always moved when she'd been somewhere else and wanted to be home. She hit Ethan at full impact, arms around his waist, face against his jacket. He held on for a moment. "You're back," she said, somewhat muffled by his jacket. "I'm back," he said. She pulled away and looked up at him with her mother's eyes, direct and assessing. "You look tired." "I am tired." "Did the car make it to the gala?" "Yes." "Did people like it?" "Yes." She considered this with the satisfaction of someone whose prediction had proven correct. "I want to see it," she said. "Today." "This afternoon," he said. "I promised you a drive." Her face changed in the way children's faces change when something they wanted actually happens. The pure, uncalculated version of it, before life teaches you to moderate your reactions to things. "How fast?" "Not very fast. It's a car that deserves to be driven slowly enough to appreciate." "Can I sit in the front?" "You're 7. Almost 8. "You can sit in the front when you're 8. She thought about this seriously. "When is my birthday?" "You know when your birthday is?" "February," she said. "That's not long." "It's 3 months." "That's not long," she said again, with conviction. He took her inside and made lunch, and Dana stayed for an hour at the kitchen table drinking coffee and catching him up on what Lily had been doing at Marcus's house, which was apparently a great deal, and Marco stood in the kitchen doorway in the way he did when he was present, but not inserting himself, which Ethan had always liked about Marco. After Dana and Marco left, he took Lily to the shop. She walked in and stopped when she saw the Mustang, the way people stopped the first time they saw it. She was quiet, which was notable, because Lily was rarely quiet about things that moved her. She walked to it slowly and stood at the front, looking at the hood. "It's really green," she said. "Yes." "It's a good green." She walked around it the same way he'd walked around it in the storage unit, slowly, looking. She touched the rear quarter panel lightly with 2 fingers, the way he touched things he was being introduced to, and he wondered where she'd learned that. "Did you name it?" she asked. "Cars don't usually get names." She looked at him like this was the most short-sighted thing she'd ever heard. "Things that have been through a lot should get names," she said. "That's a rule." "That's your rule?" "It's a good rule." She looked at the car. "I think it should be called James." He looked at her. "Why James?" "Because it belonged to somebody named James, and he loved it, and he's gone now, so the car should carry his name." She said it matter-of-factly, the way children sometimes say things that take adults weeks to arrive at. That way he's still here a little. Ethan looked at the Mustang for a moment. James Ashford. 3 letters written and a debt carried 35 years and a car preserved because preservation was the only form of repayment available. "James," he said. "Yes," Lily said, satisfied. He let her sit in the passenger seat while he started the engine, and she went completely still when the 390 came to life, her hands in her lap, head slightly tilted, listening. He watched her face from the driver's seat. "Oh," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It sounds like—" "I know," he said. "It sounds like it's breathing." She looked at him. "How did you know what I was going to say?" Somebody else said the same thing. She looked at the dash, at the gauges, at the steering wheel under his hands. "Are we going?" "We're going." He backed it out of the bay into the cold November afternoon and turned onto Millfield Road, and the Mustang moved through Millbrook the way it had moved through everything, with the composed authority of something that had found its correct purpose. Lily sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap and looked out the window at the town she'd grown up in passing by at a pace slow enough to see it. They drove for 20 minutes, out through Millbrook Center and down Route 7 a few miles and back, the same loop he'd done the day before the gala. Lily asked a few questions about the engine, about why the gauges looked different from modern cars, about what the numbers meant on the tachometer. And he answered them, and between the questions there was just the sound of the engine and the road. On the way back she said, "Dad?" "Yeah." "You seem different." He kept his eyes on the road. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Less like you're holding something," she said. "You've had a thing you were holding for a long time. It's been making you, I don't know, dense. Like something heavy." He was quiet for a moment. 7 years old, and she said dense. "Yeah," he said. "I've been carrying something." "Is it gone now?" He thought about the legal process Helen had described, the months of depositions and filings and negotiation, the public record being rebuilt piece by piece, the fact that Gerald Stapp was going to sit in a room and tell the truth about what he'd done because the alternative had become more expensive than the truth. None of that was simple. None of it was clean. "It's not gone," he said honestly. "But I put it down. There's a difference." She nodded, considering this. "You can still feel where something heavy was," she said, "even after you put it down. But at least your hands are free." He drove the Mustang back to the shop and pulled it into Bay 2 for the last time that day, and Lily helped him, or said she was helping, which was its own thing, close the bay doors. She put her hand on the car's door before they turned the light off. "Good night, James," she said to the car. He turned off the lights. He locked up. He took his daughter's hand and they walked to the truck, and he drove them home, and the shop was quiet behind them with the car inside it, and the car breathed, and it was done. What came after was not dramatic in the way the 6 weeks had been dramatic. It was the harder, slower work of consequence moving through legitimate channels. Gerald Stapp's cooperation with Helen's legal team produced the documentation that confirmed what the Meridian records implied. A deposition in which Stapp acknowledged, for the record, that the accusation filed 15 years ago against Ethan Mercer had been manufactured, that he had been compensated for filing it, that Warren Hollis had directed the effort. Stapp delivered this in the measured voice of a man who had calculated his options and chosen the one that damaged him less. And the calculation was cynical, but the result was true. Warren Hollis, retired in Florida and in poor health, declined to give a deposition but did not contest the testimony against him. His silence was its own kind of answer. Damian Cross's legal team and Helen's team reached a settlement agreement 4 months after the gala. Not a full public reckoning, but a substantial one. Cross did not admit knowledge of Hollis's conduct. What he did was pay. The settlement figures were confidential, but the terms included a formal withdrawal of all hostile acquisition attempts against Ashford Industries and a public statement acknowledging the civil findings of the Stapp case. An independent audit of Meridian Capital's historical conduct, which Cross's merger had technically made him responsible for, produced a report that was given to the financial press and which occupied the business pages for several weeks. The board of Ashford Industries voted at its spring meeting 6 months after the gala to formally sanction an independent review of Meridian's legacy conduct and to establish a restitution framework for cases in which the firm's historical practices had caused demonstrable harm. Victoria proposed the motion. It passed 13-4. Helen's team filed the formal motion to vacate the inconclusive finding against Ethan Mercer with the relevant professional bodies in February. The motion was supported by Stapp's deposition, the Meridian transaction records, and the correspondence from the Providence Archive. The process moved through the required channels over the following months with the specific slowness of formal proceedings. In June, the finding was officially vacated. Ethan's professional record was corrected. The accusation was gone. Not forgotten, because it had happened, but officially, formally, on the record, wrong. He didn't find out until Helen called him on a Thursday afternoon, and he was under a Silverado with a failing alternator, and Ray handed him the phone and said, "It's the lawyer." He came out from under the truck and took the call. "It's done," Helen said, and told him what done meant. He stood in Bay 1 with the phone in his hand after the call ended for a while. Ray watched him from the workbench and didn't say anything. "Well," Ray said finally. "It's official," Ethan said. "The record is corrected." Ray nodded slowly. "Good," he said. That was it, just good. Then, "You need to call your daughter." He called Lily, who was at school and couldn't answer, so he left a voicemail that said, "It's official. The holding thing is gone. See you tonight." He stood in the parking lot for a moment after the call and looked at Millfield Road and then went back inside and got under the Silverado. The shop expanded in the months that followed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the way real things grow, incrementally and with effort. The restoration project for the Mustang had generated enough visibility that serious inquiries came in. Not all of them led to work, and some of the work that came in was more than the current setup could handle, which meant decisions about space and people and equipment that Ethan made carefully, without hurrying. He hired a second full-time employee, a young woman named Kara who trained at a shop in New Haven and had opinions about vintage carburation that were worth taking seriously. By the following spring, the shop had a restoration bay that was dedicated and equipped, and a wait list for major projects that ran 8 months out. It was not a dramatic transformation. It was a business getting better at what it did because the person running it had more room to do it. The Mustang went on display at the Ashford Industries lobby for 2 months after the gala, a formal climate-controlled display with the documentation of the restoration alongside it. Then Victoria had it moved to the family's estate outside Farmington, where James Ashford had grown up and where the driveway was long enough to actually drive it. She called Ethan the first time she drove it alone on that driveway. "I just drove it twice around the property," she said. "Full property loop." "How did it feel?" She was quiet for a moment. "Like closure," she said, "but not the false kind. The kind that doesn't pretend the thing that needed closing wasn't real." "That's the only kind worth having," he said. "Yes." A pause. "I'm going to learn to maintain it myself. The basic things. I want to know how it works." "I can teach you." "I know. That's why I'm telling you." She came to the shop the following Saturday, in jeans and a flannel she'd bought specifically for the occasion, which was obvious but which he didn't mention. He showed her the oil change, the coolant check, the basic fluid maintenance that kept an engine like the 390 healthy between professional services. She was meticulous, which he'd expected, and asked better questions than most people who walked into his shop for the first time. "You're a quick study," he said when they were finishing up. "I'm a CEO," she said. "I learn what I need to learn." A pause. "Also, I've been reading the service manual for 3 weeks. He looked at her. That's very thorough." The 1967 Mustang service manual is extremely detailed, she said, with the straight face of someone who had spent 3 weeks with a vehicle service manual and was not going to apologize for it. He laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that comes from somewhere real. She looked slightly surprised, and then, after a second, laughed too. And they stood in the shop beside the car that her father had loved, and that had carried his debt, and that now belonged to her, and it was not perfect, and it was not resolved in every direction, and it was genuinely, concretely better than it had been. Lily turned 8 in February and came to the shop on a Saturday and sat in the front seat, as previously negotiated. "You're 8, Ethan confirmed when she climbed in. "I told you it wasn't long," she said. He took her out on Route 7, the same road, and let the engine open up a little on the clear morning stretch, and Lily held on to the door handle and made a sound of pure pleasure that was one of the better sounds he'd heard in a long time. He thought, driving back toward Millbrook with his daughter, in the passenger seat of a car he'd brought back from nothing, about what restoration actually is. Not the restoration of cars specifically. The thing itself. What it means to take something that has been damaged and stopped and sitting and understand it well enough to address what's wrong and do the work and find out if it runs. You can't make it new. You were never going to make it new. The crack in the block is still there under the weld. The repair in the quarter panel is still there under the paint. Every piece of history the car carries is still in it somewhere, legible to someone who knows how to look. What you've done is not erase the damage. You've addressed it correctly and moved it forward and made it functional again and found out whether the engine still works. And the engine works. That's what matters. Not the absence of everything that went wrong, but the fact that after everything that went wrong, the engine still works. He pulled back into the lot on Millfield Road and cut the engine. Lily sat in the passenger seat and didn't get out immediately. She looked at the shop, his name on the sign, the bay doors, the lot with its usual rotation of waiting vehicles. "This place looks like you," she said. "It is me," he said. "Partly." "The best part," she said, with the certainty of someone who is 7 years old and right. He looked at the shop. He thought about what it had been when he bought it. A mess, poorly organized, full of other people's unfinished work. And what it was now after 7 years of making it what he needed it to be. And what it would be in another 7. With the restoration work growing, with Kara's good opinions about carburation, with the wait list and the space and the tools. He thought about what the last 6 months had returned to him. Not youth, not the early version of himself before the damage. Something different. The ability to say out loud what he was capable of, to take the work that matched his actual skill and do it without shrinking it first. He thought about a folded letter with a single initial on the outside and an engine that had been waiting 40 years to run. "Come on," he said to Lily. "Let's go home." She got out of the car and they walked across the lot together, and he locked the shop behind him, and the Mustang sat in Bay 2 as they left it, green and quiet and complete, carrying everything it had always carried, lighter now by the weight of what had finally been said. Some things stay broken until the right person decides they're not. And sometimes the work of fixing one thing turns out to be the work of fixing everything.